behalf of US India Business Summit, I welcome you to our special program today with Georgia Tech Cyber and Equinix. Title of the program is Global Trends in Digital Infrastructure. We have been working with Georgia Tech Cyber for the last 12 years, and we have just started working with Equinix. We welcome them as our premier partner. We have a packed program till 5 p.m. I request all of you to please join and enjoy the sessions. With this, I would like to introduce my colleague and co-chair for US India Business Summit and Georgia Tech Global Business Forum, Dr. John McIntyre from Scheller College of Business, Georgia Tech. John.
Thank you, Ani, and welcome to this event, Global Trends in Digital Infrastructure. I'm John McIntyre, a professor at the Scheller College of Management. I'm also director of its Cyber Center, one of the federally funded 15 centers in the United States. We're particularly happy to lead off in the program with Dr. Richard DeMillo, who is known to many of us, to most of us, and it's my task to introduce him. I'll try and be as brief as possible because this is a man of many achievements and who is in the process of really moving mountains to really get the fourth school program started at Georgia Tech. So Richard DeMillo, currently the chair of the new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. This will be the fourth school he has stood up at Georgia Tech and in higher education. He also holds the Charles B. and Roger C. Warren Chair in Computer Science, and he's also a professor of management at Georgia Tech. He's extremely well known for most of us at Georgia Tech and in higher education for founding and directing the Center for 21st Century University, C21U, Georgia Tech's living laboratory for fundamental change in higher education. Indeed, he is one of the leaders and change agents in the technology revolution for higher education. I note that he was the Lumina Foundation inaugural fellow to recognize his landmark work in higher education. From 2015 to 2018, he co-chaired the Georgia Tech Commission on Creating the Next in Higher Education, CNE. He's also, I note among his achievements, the past John P. Imlay Dean of the Computing College at Georgia Tech, where he led the design and also the implementation of the THREADS program, which transformed undergraduate engineering education in the US and around the world. His book, well known to me, and I think most of us should have a copy of it. It's a book that's a 2011 book, which has been updated, by the way, Abélard to Apple. You will remember Abélard, the French scholar of Middle Ages days. Abélard to Apple, the fate of American colleges and university. It's a pleasure to introduce him. You have his biography. He will tell us more about his new school, the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. And at the end of his presentation, he will be available for questions and answers. I note that if you don't have a chance to ask a question, he's also available to answer questions by email, and we will communicate his email at a later time. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours, Rich.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ani. Thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's too bad we can't be in the same room and see each other, but these are the times we live in. So I'm going to get right to the point of my talk today, which is about the subject of this meeting, and it has to do with what enables the kinds of digital transformations that you all are going to be talking about during the course of the day. Great, thank you. So as I said, I want to jump into this discussion of enablers for digital infrastructure, and speak to you this afternoon from the point of view of the transformation that has to take place in order to make digital infrastructure a reality on a global scale. I come to you as a technologist, so I tend to think about these things in terms of what technology brings to the table and what drives technological change. And Jim, if we can advance to the next slide. We tend to think about digital transformation in the way that this graph shows. So it's a series of technology curves, a series of S curves, if you will, that we're all familiar with. Down at the beginning, at the left-hand side of one of those little S's, you have innovative technology that no one really believes in, and then all of a sudden there's an exponential growth in interest, and everyone is sure that this is going to change the world, and then things level out. After that inflection point, things level out, and that's where they would sit were it not for this series of innovations, technological innovations that change the rules of the game. And you can see in just about every industry on the planet that has been through digital transformation, this process taking place. Even computers themselves have gone through these cycles of S-curve innovations, punctuated by disruptive innovation. And it would be impossible, of course, to make a list of the industries that are affected. But if you just think about it for a couple seconds, it is literally every industry on the planet. It's hard to find an area of human activity that has not been changed in some way by digital infrastructure. And so now we step back and we talk about scale. What does it mean to operate on a global scale? And of course, what you should notice about this chart is that not all of those industries are created equal. Aerospace, automotive, banking; those are all industries that we're familiar with. But there are some industries in cautionary yellow in that list that you don't normally think about as benefiting from digital transformation: espionage, human trafficking, international terrorism, organized crime. So some industries are sources of wealth and well-being for the planet, but others, bad actors, also benefit. What do we take away from this? What we take away from this is that these technologies that I'm talking about are the foundations of the global economy, and they become more capable over time. That's what's driving growth. That's what's driving all of our interest in digital infrastructure. But because they're becoming more capable, and they're also available to all the bad actors in the world, the more capable foundations for digital infrastructure also mean more capability for cyber criminals. And that's where I want to do a dive this afternoon into what the trends are that can either enable or threaten the growth in digital infrastructure, depending on your point of view. And maybe the way to do that is to think about what does all of this look like on a global scale. Let's see if we can imagine what it's like to be in the middle of a global attack on modern digital infrastructure. Jim, if you can advance to the next chart. This is a map of malicious traffic flowing around the world, internet traffic flowing around the world on, let's see, is it moving? May have to start. Here we go. Flowing around the world in late October of 2017. These are the days that led up to a U.S. election, as a matter of fact, the so-called off-year election in the United States. There were no presidents or senators at stake. These were all local races. But let's see what happens. It starts out slowly enough in the first part of October, and the traffic builds. And I'm just going to sit back and watch the traffic as we approach November 1st. We're now getting close to the election, and you see malicious traffic growing. This is traffic from attackers. You can see some of the sources of the. And on November 1st, what happens? The world blanks out. This has all the look and feel of a science fiction movie about global pandemics. Kind of ironic that we're talking about global pandemics here. It feels like you're in the middle of a pandemic, doesn't it? That's what the world experiences several times a week. And this particular attack, we don't know very much about, except that it occurred around a U.S. election. We don't know what motivated it. We don't know. Was it simply an attempt to divert the attention of CIOs around the world so that something else could take place, or was it an actual attack on U.S. election infrastructure? We'll likely never know. But it does raise the question that I want to direct you to this afternoon, which is how well are we prepared? Are people and systems prepared for these kinds of attacks? Jim, if you can advance. This is the nightmare that we all have in mind, that we built this incredibly complex and capable digital infrastructure. We think on secure foundations, but we don't really know. How do we know, for example, that the entire infrastructure for an industry doesn't rest on a project that some random person in Nebraska has been maintaining on a volunteer basis since 2003? Well, we don't. We don't. And that's where we start looking for trends in cybersecurity that will give us a clue as to what we need to do in order to get ahead of the attackers. Next slide. So let me just very quickly cite some of the top global cybersecurity threats this year in 2021. And I'm going to concentrate on just three of them in the list because they happen to be current. These are things that you have read about in the Wall Street Journal or the newspapers that you read on a daily basis, and they all illustrate what is going on in digital infrastructure that puts all of our infrastructure at risk. Beginning with cloud service attacks. If we can move to the next slide. So cloud services are a long-term trend in digital infrastructure. Rather than maintain large data centers, services can move to co-located services and large purchased service data centers. That's a trend that's been going on for a long time. The pandemic has accelerated the trend, if for no other reason than people are spending more and more time working from home, working off-site, and the computing power that's needed to run the business services are simply not co-located with them, that they have to purchase the services somewhere else. What we're seeing this year is a massive increase in the number of attacks on cloud-based services. The most recent of which is this attack that happened just 10 days ago on the clients of a radio stereo taxis equipment manufacturer called Electa. This is a machine that treats cancer patients with computationally complex and intensive radiation therapy. Their systems were hacked. They were hacked by people that were after patient information. They could have been after crippling the machines themselves in order to extract ransom from the hospitals. And it illustrates one of the trends. There are more and more high stakes victims from these kinds of attacks. A hospital, lives of the patients rely on the availability of healthcare services. So the management of the hospitals or the healthcare systems have this huge incentive in order to satisfy the attackers, even if that means paying ransom in order to unlock the systems. There are ways to counter these threats, and we teach about these in class. But the attacks keep growing, and it's one of the most notable trends in 2021. Jim, if we can move to the next chart. Another one that you may have heard about is the supply chain attack. It really sprung to life with this disclosure at the end of 2020 that a company called SolarWinds, which had been selling network management systems to a large number of enterprise customers, 18,000 or more enterprise customers around the world, including intelligence agencies and defense agencies for nations and nation states. That the software that was used to manage the systems had been compromised during the software development process and what's called a software build. And this little cartoon here shows the way in which that was done. But what you might think about is that the SolarWinds company was outsourcing its software development to third parties, and those third parties either maliciously or through inadvertent means managed to include some malware in a software build, which then got distributed to all of these clients. The malware included backdoors, so that any place that the Orion software product was installed, an attacker could actually just sell access to that infrastructure by allowing access to the back door. It disrupted government agencies, disrupted industries. Did not disrupt Georgia Tech, fortunately, but a large number of other large enterprises and universities were affected by SolarWinds. And it illustrates another one of the trends, things that we thought we understood. The supply chain that leads up to the development of digital infrastructure is itself a network-based service and has to be protected as a cyber resource. Next slide. And then we couldn't finish a discussion of 2021 without talking about January 6th. A top cyber threat that none of us really anticipated in this form was using the power of information, weaponizing disinformation to sow doubt about institutions, to instill chaos in the way our processes work. Sometimes as simple as using social media as a tactical platform to mount an attack. Sometimes a more complicated attack vector in which you exploit what the public knows about the vulnerabilities of digital infrastructure to undermine confidence. And as we saw in the last election, create a cloud of confusion that to the average person makes it difficult to distinguish between baseless claims and technical facts. And you can see that a number of people have looked at, for example, the analysis of tweets that occurred in a critical period around the 2020 elections to identify the top promoters that use the hashtag Stop the Steal in social media. So those are among the top trends in threats, and the question is, what do we as developers and interested parties in digital infrastructure do about that? We can move to the next slide. In my current role as the chair of this new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy at Georgia Tech, I internalize that question as follows. I'm asking, are we prepared for these threats and related threats? And I hope I've given you some of the context for this. There's a global and growing skills gap. We have too many threats. The threats are growing much more quickly than we have professionals to counter the threats. And this is a profile that cuts across continents, nations. It is really a global problem. Worldwide, we have millions of jobs that are aimed at preventing the kinds of attacks we just looked at that are unfilled because the people simply don't exist. They haven't been trained. In the United States, 500,000 or so unfilled positions. There's a global gap in the cybersecurity workforce. It varies by region. Some areas like the Asian Pacific region have a very noticeable difference, probably because of the location of the companies in that region. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we do about that? And the natural thing to do in these circumstances, if we move to the next slide, is to look at training, and we look at training from a bottom-up standpoint usually. What can we do to reorient, to re-equip, to re-educate the existing workforce? In the area of cybersecurity, that's not where the problem is. The problem is that the need is greatest in areas where advanced training and advanced expertise are required, either graduate degrees or advanced training in measures or countermeasures. And you can see the Burning Glass estimates 5-year projected growth for cybersecurity skills that are going to be needed to at least keep up with some of the threats that we've been looking at. These are not the kinds of things that you can get by buying a Networking for Dummies book for your network administrators. You have to have a dedicated initiative in order to bring people up to speed, and that involves colleges and universities. And since I'm involved in higher education, it's something that I think about on a daily basis. You can find at least across the U.S. and there are versions of this in most of the developed world. You can find programs that are aimed squarely at the problems that we're talking about. And there are maybe 20 institutions in the United States that offer the kinds of training that we're talking about. And they're the places where increasingly we're turning for help, for analysis, and for the kinds of innovations that are going to help even out those attacks, or maybe even mediate them in some way. When Georgia Tech decided to stand up a new school of cybersecurity and privacy, it really involved taking a look at this list of institutions and deciding, can they operate at a scale that is appropriate to the task at hand. So when Georgia Tech decided to launch the School of Cybersecurity and Privacy in September of last year, we moved to the next slide, Jim. It was with this idea that we would be able to operate at scale, and to us, operating at scale means not only educating students in ones or twos or 20s or 30s in a classroom. It means having a global reach. We went from a very highly regarded graduate program, online residential master's program in computer science, one of the top 4 or 5 in the world likely, to an online version of that program, which became literally overnight the largest graduate program in computer science in the world. And that's the ambition that we have for cybersecurity too. We think that we can operate at the scale that is going to be needed in order to meet those challenges, and we hope other institutions follow suit. Our current School of Cybersecurity and Privacy, in its first few months, already has 1,500 students. We offer 3 degree programs, lots of professional courses and credit-bearing courses. But most importantly, we are aimed at educational innovation. You may have heard from John's introduction a few minutes ago that part of my background is educational innovation, and we bring that dedication to educating in an innovative way to this problem. The faculty that we're assembling is an award-winning faculty, and we think it's speaks directly to the nature of the problem. So I'm going to leave it there and open things up for questions, John. The thing I want to leave you with is this picture of where I'm sitting right now. This beautiful new building on the edge of the Georgia Tech campus, which I have to point out is not one or two offices tucked away in a computer science department someplace. It is a degree granting school all of its own in this large educational institution, and it's the kind of thing that we think is going to move the needle in cybersecurity going forward. So I hope that that summary was helpful to you in picturing both the kind of nature of the problem, where things are going, and some of the ways in which the world is responding to the risks and the attacks on our infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Rich, for an impactful presentation, really covering many topics which deserve more in-depth treatment, but you were given 20 minutes, so you covered the surface of the topic. I do have one question as moderator, and it's a tough one, and feel free to tell me so. Cybersecurity and privacy are two sides of the same coin in a way, or correct me if I'm wrong. How do you balance the two, and how do you train future technologists who can be sensitive to the needs for the requirements for cybersecurity and the needs for privacy in various publics using the technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and it's the reason that cybersecurity and privacy are in the title of the school. If we had gone through some of the other attacks in my top 5 list, we would have seen, for example, the threats to consumer privacy. Unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that. Privacy is one of those things where national posture, local culture drives your response to it a lot. So the United States, for example, has no federal legislation to regulate the use of personal data. Unlike Europe, the GDPR, which some people malign as a hindrance to business, has put a stake in the ground and said, here's how data must be curated and used. We don't have that in the U.S., but the two come together, and they come together in ways that are used to build new businesses. OneTrust, the fastest growing company in the country, is a spin out of Georgia Tech. It's a result of a company founded by a Georgia Tech graduate who took what he knew about cybersecurity and applied it to protecting information, protecting data in businesses and for individuals. So it can be done, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Any hope for an international regime governing the balancing cybersecurity, or are we headed towards digital nationalism, different major blocks moving in different directions with different standards and criteria?
You know, I despair on a weekly basis about this. I think the U.S. political climate makes it a dicey proposition to have very tight national regulation of any industry, in particular those industries that make use of this information. So you'll find strong state laws in California, for example, and then a push at the federal level to provide a federal law that actually lowers the bar for everyone across the country. I don't know how that's going to work out, but it is an arms race, and it's like the same kind of arms race that we saw with those little S curves at the start of my talk. AI provides the ability for bad actors to infer information about individuals, even though you haven't made all of that information public. And those kinds of problems are going to be with us for a long time. So it's an area that's ripe for innovation. As a supervisor of PhD students, I love it because there are lots of problems to work on. But as a human being and a citizen, I'm very concerned that we're moving much faster than the technology enables us to go.
Thank you very much. We're running close to the end of your time. Jim, you're curating questions. Do you wish to introduce some questions?
Yes, I'll go very quickly. One person had a question about the list of disruptive innovations that education was not included in that list. They were, that's almost more of a comment than a question, but that was something that they asked. Did you have something to say on that?
Well, so the innovation that education pumps into the system is frankly speaking a mixed bag. I think we do a pretty good job at it, but institutions of learning change very, very slowly. So I wish we were more agile. I wish there were more places like Georgia Tech that made big bets on these directions. But for right now, we're out there alone. I think we'll be rewarded for it, but the industry has simply not kept pace.
Yeah, one more question. For the, I assume it's the 2017 attacks. Mexico was not involved in that, or they're noting that in the animation that there seemed to be no traffic coming from Mexico.
Right. So there was a threshold as to what was reported on the map. The big flows that you saw were from North Korea, Iran, and Russia, and those were the things that drove traffic for those. Those were denial of service attacks. So those were the things that drove those particular denial of service attacks. We don't know who the sponsors were. It could have been anywhere in the world, but the attacks originated from those three places.
Thank you very much, Rich. We really appreciate your presentation. I believe we can share your PowerPoint.
Yes.
We are recording, of course, the session. I hope you can stay with us a little longer if your schedule permits it. And
I will.
To move on to the second panel, of which I'm the actual moderator, so I'm just going to stay on screen and introduce our panelists. This is a panel that runs from 1:30 to 2:40 to keep in mind the schedule. And the panel is titled, picking up on Rich's presentation, Global Trends in Digital Infrastructure, Accelerating Your Digital Transformation. And we have four outstanding experienced speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge, information. It's my pleasure to introduce them in the order of the program. First, I want to introduce Tanuj Raja, who is currently the Global Head of Strategic Partnerships with Google Cloud. Tanuj has held that functions for a while now. He manages telecom and edge ecosystem of partners and leads digital transformations across enterprises. Quite a job, quite a set of responsibilities. He's been with Google since 2013 and has held several positions at Google. He previously managed cloud commerce, the cloud commerce platform and partnerships, and he built the Android enterprise practice and managed key Android OEM partnerships. He is a 20-year industry veteran with extensive background in partnerships, product management, and business development for edge computing, mobile marketing, wireless infrastructure. So really, it's a pleasure to have you today. Allow me to present your colleagues. We're going to do an overall presentation of presenters, and then we'll turn it over to you. The second presenter will be CB Velayutan, who is with us. CB is Global Managing Director of Strategic Alliances with Equinix. CB is the Global Managing Director, as I indicated, Strategic Alliances with Equinix, the world's digital platform. He's a multinational professional with careers spanning IT and telecom. He has led quite a number of efforts in global teams, managed business P&L, reignited growth, tremendous achievements in the field of business management. He has deep experience working in IT, IP networking, mobile telecoms, from 2G to IP, optical cloud, edge networking. And I note that he has actual field experience in the USA, the Philippines, China, and India. This is wonderful for me as a professor of international business and operations to hear that. And he emphasizes deep customer relationships. Therefore, he knows how to manage cross-cultural issues. He has a record, as I said, of developing successful multinational teams. He received his MBA in global business and techno-entrepreneurship from the Helsinki School of Economics, which I know well in Finland, and is a result-focused leader. And it's a pleasure to have you here today. And we look forward to your presentation. The third speaker is Mark Thomas, Managing Director and CIO of Evicor. He joins us from beautiful Hilton Head in South Carolina. Is Chief Information Officer, responsible for oversight of all areas of technology at Evicor, including product-related software development, infrastructure, analytics, engineering, and various call centers operation. He has more than 20 years of experience in broad technology leadership, which includes various phases: key business technology, partner management, and he is a recipient of degrees in applied mathematics, in advanced degrees from Auburn University, and also an MBA from the University of South Alabama. And we move on to the last speaker. It's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Olli Junila, CTO, excuse me, of Nokia, where he heads the technology division for North America customer experience. He's responsible for defining Nokia's technology strategy and vision, C-level technology relationships, driving Nokia engineering partnering with technology vision and roadmaps to ensure right product decisions. Prior to being at Nokia, he was at Microsoft running a tier 1 account, and he began his career actually with Nokia Cellular Systems in Finland. I hasten to say that Finland is a remarkable country when it comes to ITC. It deserves to be better known in the United States for its achievements. He has held several positions of leadership with Nokia Finland prior to moving to the USA in 2006. He has a master's degree in industrial engineering and management, electrical engineering from the University of Technology at Tampere, Finland. It's a pleasure to welcome you all, gentlemen. I'm impressed by the amount of expertise and experience you bring. I think we are doing short shrift and not giving you enough time, and therefore I will stop right here and turn it over to our first speaker, and looking forward to your presentation, Mr. Tanu Raja.
Good morning, folks. Hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. The topic today is obviously digital transformation during COVID. So COVID is on our minds, and we've dealt through this terrible pandemic over the past year and a half. But I'm happy to discuss with you today on how we're looking at digital transformation through the eyes of COVID and beyond. John, thank you so much for the introduction. Appreciate that. Tanuj Raja, been at Google for about 8 years, and look forward to the discussion. Next slide, please. So it's pretty impressive as we look at what's happened or what's transpired in the past 15 months or so. The global acceleration of digital transformation, or aspects of digital transformation that has occurred in the last 15 months or so, is immensely amazing, right? Average adoption acceleration is 7 years, according to McKinsey, and we're seeing that, you know, in our business as well. Companies have essentially jumped onto this bandwagon of doing supply chain management transformation, B2C, consumer interaction transformation, scaling businesses as quickly as possible, or transforming businesses as quickly as possible across the globe, just so that the consumer demand can be met. This consumer demand went pretty much from in-person demand to online demand overnight. If the attendees think of the the paper towel shortage that the US felt, it was all due to lack of supply chain management and understanding the demand curves that would occur in scenarios of lockdown, etc. So clearly, the impact of COVID has resulted in this adoption of scalable solutions globally, and while not everything obviously is harmonious. Its bits and pieces here are still broken, continue to be broken. We're still seeing a rapid acceleration towards digital transformation. And I must add, it's not just B2C or B2B world, it's also being seen in the education industry. It's being seen in high schools, it's been seen everywhere. So no real vertical is immune to this particular transformation that's happening. It's absolutely necessary, and the adoption curve has accelerated on average for 7 years, which is truly amazing. Next slide, please. And however, it's interesting to see that the very backbone of the communication service industries and infrastructure backbone is broken itself, right? So we were really depending on the CSPs, the Verizons, the AT&Ts of the world to deliver all of this backbone infrastructure to enable digital transformation. And one of the things that we found out was that industry itself is going through digital transformation themselves, especially when it comes to the advent of 5G and deployment of 5G. Next slide, please. And again, it's interesting to see that the CSPs themselves, if they don't have scalable solutions, if they are not able to consume the 5G networks and are not able to actually deploy them in time to enable those digital transformations, then they will themselves fail. Their own disruption and their own cost of developing and deploying 5G solutions is pretty interesting to see, especially because most of the companies, even the SMB companies that want to be part of this digital transformation rely on the backbone of this infrastructure. And if this infrastructure cannot scale, then even though we had that 7-year surge, we're not going to be able to sustain that over a period of time, because a lot of these digital transformation journeys that companies have taken have been done almost haphazardly or need-to-do basis. And the communication industry itself is not in a place where they can help B2B, B2C companies and digital transformations happen, enable that to happen in a fashion where everyone can actually benefit from. So when we talk about doing digital transformation, it's important to understand and remember that the underlying infrastructure to support this massive surge of digital transformation journeys that companies are taking actually require a communication industry that's well poised. And that's a challenge that the globe is facing as well. Next slide, please. So how does Google look at success, and what does a digital transformation journey looks like, right? It's all of the above. You have to take a holistic approach. You can't just do one area. You can't just automate your supply chain chain. You can't just collect your data on-prem and try to get some insights into it. So it has to be a holistic approach. So when we engage with companies for their digital transformation journey, we look at a customer-centric strategy, right? What is the end goal? What are we trying to deliver? What is what is the company's mission, and how do they want to enable their customers? How do they want to empower people? That's very important. The key assets of any company are its people. We tend to, almost neglect that sometimes. But how do we empower people? Google itself is a great example of that journey. When we shut down, we basically went remote, and our entire HR leadership created solutions for people to work at home almost overnight. It's an example of how empowering people can increase productivity, increase inclusiveness, create those values and empowerment that is, really helps the mission of the company itself. You also have to look at digital capabilities, right? What capabilities and what scenarios that need to be agile. An example of this is quite fascinating to me. I was at a restaurant last night, Cinco de Mayo, ordering some Mexican food, and this small SMB family-run restaurant has to essentially transform themselves from a face-to-face serving restaurant to a DoorDash or an Uber Eats restaurant. But what they forgot was that there were people ordering food, on their own website. So while they are essentially, transforming themselves by going online and delivering food and increasing their own revenues through DoorDash and Uber Eats, they neglected to figure out how they can stop taking orders on their own website so that customers are not waiting in long lines. It's a fascinating story of where digital transformation actually begins at the very lowest denominator of a family-run restaurant. What does technology look like? What does the technology backbone look like besides the communication industry? What do we need to do to create secure, modernized backbone that essentially creates the ability to run data analytics, run supply chain management, run inventory management through different types of solutions. That data can then be quickly analyzed and modifications made. So it's an overall holistic approach that will eventually enable companies all the way down to family-owned restaurants to all large companies to go through successful digital transformation. Next slide, please. Drilling down a little bit, we basically want to look at the infrastructure modernization. One needs to migrate and modernize workloads. Data management is the key in this scenario. We want to look at application development, run these applications that are end consumer facing, and generate insights through those apps for demand generation and demand understanding. Use tools that are available from machine learning and analytics perspective. Use productivity tools, whether it's Zoom or Google Hangouts and things of that nature that help companies collaborate remotely. Improve efficiency. When you look at industry solutions and industry verticals, what makes sense in the manufacturing industry from a digital transformation perspective may be very different than what it makes for a retail store. And have to have role-based solutions. That's key, going back to the empowerment of folks and people. Role-based solutions are essentially necessary for a successful digital transformation. Next slide, please. Here's a quick case study of revamping what a retail experience might look like. The underlying infrastructure, scalable operation obviously is the backbone of optimizing, your entire operation. But there are different aspects of services that need to be looked at: warehousing, merchandising, dynamic pricing. All of that tied together with an e-commerce platform that can actually change pricing based either on timing or inventory and availability, fulfillment chains and digital fulfillment or delivery. One has to also look at intelligent inventory management. and optimizing end-to-end consumer experience when it comes to platform delivery from an app solution perspective, how consumers interact with your actual virtual stores online. And then the new aspect of having a store experience where deliveries can be managed and frictionless checkout, POS enablement, etc., etc. So one has to look at this from a holistic perspective and figure out exactly which areas one needs to be optimized and get on a digital transformation journey. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, a sustainable framework looks like a customer experience has to be first in mind. We at Google also look at what can we do that generates 10x innovation. How do we govern these digital transformation systems? What are the technology pieces and backbones that we need to build? And the biggest one, obviously, is people empowerment, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much, Tanuj, for the presentation. We're going to wait and defer questions to the end in the interest of time. We have a lot of questions to ask, so if you can hold on. We next move to CB Tan. A pleasure to have you, CB, and to meet you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Dr. McIntyre. Thank you, and to the organizers of this event of Georgia Tech. Thanks to all the speakers today. I mean, Equinix is proud to be part of this event and excited also. And also thank to all the participants and the audience who are there who dialed in today. I really, really look forward to this. And again, thank everyone for this opportunity. Tanuj and also before Dr. DeMillo actually talked about cybersecurity, and Tanuj talked about the entire stack of just how do you go about doing a digital transformation, which I think is, I mean, while it's the topic of the day, it's also something I think every industry today is grappling with in terms of just what and how do you go about doing it. And I thought I'd just probably spend some time focusing on one element of that, and I'll talk about what that is, which is how can you actually accelerate what we in Equinix call the digital advantage, and in terms of just how do you drive that, why do you need to do that, and what some of the building blocks of how you can actually enable that to be able to do it, and what do you actually get out of that. So that's the crux of what I'd just like to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so, and thanks again for that. If you just move on to the next slide. We've talked earlier on about leaders, industry leaders. We've had different titles for captains of the industries and others. Today, when we look at what is a successful company or some who's going to be leading in the world today, we have to come down to what's called as digital leaders. A digital leader, by definition, would be somebody or a company which actually enables their organization to be able to respond, act, and also be able to get ahead of what the changing needs and the demands are of just the world and society in general. We saw some of the changes that have happened now over the last year, which you could say have just accelerated what was already a force that was being impacting the entire world. But nevertheless, it just landed up accelerating it and brought back to the fact that being a digital leader is probably the very crux of the existence of any company, let alone for that company to be successful and actually lead across their competitors. If we just looked at why and what's going on in the market, I mean, it's no new news. All markets are global. I mean, it's great. It's a great advantage, but it's also something that every industry needs to take into account. We've looked at companies that, for example, Netflix today can actually access the entire world audience by just being able to actually sell their products and deliver that. The cloud service providers like Google have been doing that in the last decades and being very successful about that. The other element that's also changing is that some of the traditional capital intensive industries are being shaken on their very roots in terms of just what they need to be and how do they need to be setting up going forward, because shared economies are changing that. Uber, for example, threatens the entire transportation industry by letting users and consumers and also producers, which is people who've got an asset of a car, to be able to be linked directly without having to have an established transport industry in between that. And last but not least, which I think is relevant in the digital space, is information is actually a product. Information is not something that enables you to sell the product. It is the product itself. And that's something that we all need to also understand as a new reality in terms of just what's going on. If you move on to the next slide, in terms of just, if this is the definition of what we need people to be as digital leaders, what can that give us? A digital leader actually, we think, gets people to get a digital advantage. And a digital advantage, again, is not just things that will help you to be able to get better and be able to do all the great things that we talk here about, whether it's accessing markets or being global, scaling and being resilient and being able to drive things. But we think from Equinix, it's almost the core of your existence going forward. And that's something that we need to keep in mind as we land up actually navigating through where we are and how we set ourselves up for in this new world in terms of where we are today. Moving forward, the key, if you just want to move to the next slide, the key to it being a digital advantage, to get that digital advantage, a question that people might ask is, how do you get that digital advantage? And what constitutes some of the building blocks of doing that? And again, here, compared to the previous generation of how we've built industries, how we build brands, which is by physical infrastructure, we think the core of this is going to be digital infrastructure. And let's just see why that's so important and how can you actually be able to help be able to drive that and be the digital leader that I think every company wants to aspire to be. First things, we all know that data is exploding. That's no news. But did you know that we think that by 2025, over 30% of all the data is going to be on real-time experience. It's going to be created, consumed on real time. What does that mean? For a company that wants to become a digital leader, you've got to be able to have your infrastructure where the data is being consumed and actually being produced, which is on the edge. So you need to be able to figure out how we can actually distribute infrastructure that actually is there. The second thing is, if you're going to be distributing it, one of the elements that is going to be of absolute importance is speed. I mean, just having a little bit of latency and also having any overheads that you have on the traditional networks can create so much delay that it can pull down user experience and actually drive customers away from your product and from your engagement that you have. And so that's another element that people need to take into account when they actually look at creating a digital infrastructure that can give them this digital advantage. And last but not least, and just one more thing is, it's all great to say we've got to build digital infrastructure, you've got to bring it closer. But one of the immediate things that happens because of that is costs start increasing. The transport cost of just moving data across becomes so enormous. For example, moving 100 terabytes of data between just two places, in terms of egress costs and the other access costs could run up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year. So that's another thing that people need to be very careful about as they go about navigating a digital infrastructure world that they want to build up. The good news here, though, is that there are lots of ways that you can counter all three of these and be able to find a way to get your digital advantage and be able to drive on that. For example, building a network infrastructure that accesses hybrid clouds along with your own on-prem infrastructure and information that you have can actually result in incredible cost savings for any company that wants to actually build and drive that. So it's an important thing to keep in mind as we land up building these infrastructures. So if we go on to the next slide. It's easier said than done, of course, just like anything in the world is. And which is why I think it's important we keep some of the pointers in mind that as every company tries to move on, they need to kind of figure out how do they take some of the traditional infrastructure and be able to bring in some of the modernized elements of it. How do they look at geographies? How do they look at internal processes, which I know Tanuj again talked about some of them in terms of just how if you move things from being physical to online and being remote, what are some of the things that you need to do to be able to be pretty responsive and do that on near real time, because that's the demand today that is expected of people. So moving on, we in Equinix, if you move on to the next slide, James, we in Equinix actually having worked with the industry leaders and worked with all customers globally, have also have a good view of just where and what this digital infrastructure is today and what it's going to be for the future. So I hope this gives some pointers for people here in the panel and in the audience today to look at when they're designing their company, their enterprise setups going forward, taking some of these pointers in terms of just how infrastructure is going to be and where it's going to be. Firstly, the IT infrastructure, which forms the platform for the digital infrastructure to be built, is actually everywhere. We talked about, real-time access of data. So that is something that's going to be just even more relevant as we go forward. That's something that's important to keep in mind. The next one is there is going to be no one company that is going to be able to lead and drive and manage all this change. The most successful companies are those that will be able to manage an ecosystem of partners and work with different partners around the whole chain and drive that. I talked about some of the hybrid things of being able to not just be on one cloud and or on just on an on-prem or others. The networks have to be hybrid. It has to be something that's resilient and managed across. And last but not least, they have to have interconnections with the clouds, with other players, and also do that very securely and be able to drive that. And this is where, if we move on to the next slide, we in Equinix actually believe that to be able to get any company to be able to drive their platform in and be able to be that platform, we have a platform there which actually will enable and enables companies to become that digital leader that they aspire to be by being in the right places with all the partners and also the right possibilities that we have. And if you move on, if you change to the next slide, when we mean by saying that we're in the right places, I talked about companies having to be in the edge and also in the center and being in the center. Equinix today has got over 220 data centers across 26 countries, and we continue to keep expanding. We are the world's leaders in the data center space, and we also make sure that for companies that want to build the data infrastructure on our platform, the uptimes that we guarantee are over 5 nines, and also landed making sure that it's the most secure and reliable place for companies to build their infrastructure from. And to the next slide. And when we talk about the partners, I talked about ecosystem. We actually work with all the leading cloud players, network players, and IT providers, apart from over 10,000 enterprises that we're actually associated with, which are on our platform Equinix. So any enterprise being able to come into a platform can get the benefit of all of that. Google, for example, is a great partner of ours that we're very proud to be working with, and so is Nokia and other network providers there. And just moving on to the next slide. We also, with all the advantage that we have, we can actually provide all the right possibilities for enterprises to be able to take access to this great asset that we have, whether it's the customers, whether it's our presence, and or whether the connections that we can actually enable and accelerate for these enterprises. So just to sum up, every leader has got to be, if you want to be successful, you've got to be a digital leader. And to be a digital leader, you need to be able to create digital advantages, which land up coming in from a digital infrastructure that you drive in. And that digital infrastructure, we in Equinix think that we can actually provide that advantage for companies that want to be able to get that going forward. Moving on to the next slide. We are also proud that while doing all that, that we're very conscious of the impact that we create on the society and on the world in general. And so we're proud to actually have a commitment to have over 100% clean, renewable energy as a pledge that we've taken, and we promote that. We build up, we're very conscious of the data centers we build and the energy production that we do. And that's another element of being a responsible citizen and a partner in the world today. So, and just moving on with that in mind, I just thought I'd just end it with probably a couple of things about just industries that are actually being impacted and actually taking the benefit of what we call as a platform in Equinix. Just a few months back, we saw the chaos that one ship being stranded in the Suez Canal created to them, nearly brought the entire supply chain and the world economy down to their knees in a way. Naverick is a company that actually deals with that. It provides real-time information for supply chains, for commodities in the supply chain business. And when they needed to want to expand their business, where they were wanting to take the best of their Oracle databases and work with Google Cloud to take the best of their analytics and the machine language and application development, they did that on our platform Equinix. So what that enabled them to do was, as you can see on the right, all their different constituents and stakeholders, whether it was the ships, whether it was traders, whether it was customers across the different places in the world, were able to access into the platform Equinix and use that to be able to get real-time analytics using Google Cloud and also be able to access their Oracle database. So things that would used to take them weeks that were there before now were real-time, and they were almost instantaneous, which ended up actually giving them an incredible advantage in terms of just what they are. So with that, I think I just wanted to end this by saying that and we've got more examples. If we can move on to the next slide. I know there's an interest of time. Can we move on? I just wanted to round it up by saying digital infrastructure is going to be key for any company that wants to ride the digital, the transformation that's happening, the disruption that's happening in the world today. And I think there are some clear steps on how you can do that. And we in Equinix are excited to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CB, for an exciting presentation. As I listened to you as a professor of international management, I couldn't help but think that the Navarick example is a great case study for MBA and other advanced graduate students. Maybe asking you some more questions later. Thank you, and thank you very much. We then move on to our next presenter, keeping in mind the schedule, Mark Thomas, who is with us from South Carolina. Mark?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity as well. I'm going to take a little different approach today and maybe focus on the culture side of digital transformation instead of the technology side. But if you'll go to the next slide, we'll just we're going to start out. We'll talk a little bit about Evercore, probably because you've never heard of Evercore, not quite as famous as Google or Equinix. If you'll go back real quick. And then I'm gonna talk about the relationship between culture and architecture, and then maybe give a little nod on the playbook that we're running on how we're going through our digital transformation. And one of the things I just wanted to point out, I love that Tanuj mentioned, people first. We learned that lesson in real time, which is what I'm talking about today. And I'm really wanting to extend that to the transformation is really beyond people first, but culture first. And we'll see if you agree with me. But okay, you can go to the next slide. So who is Evercore? It's important. I just want to give a little context on who we are so that our transformation and this culture first approach will make a little more sense. But we are the market leader around comprehensive medical benefits management. We have solutions across 10 medical disciplines. We have over 100 million lives that we manage, and for those 100 million lives, we can impact somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on the lines of business, but somewhere between 20 and 40% of the medical spend. We interact at any given time with over 500,000 providers across the U.S., and we have over 100 clients, and we use 4 different value levers really to manage the medical spend, whether it's provider engagement, member engagement, payment integrity solutions, as well as looking at unit costs. But it's all bringing those things together really to just the focus is ensuring that our patients get the right care at the right time at the right price. So if you go to the next slide. So why do we need to transform? Well, you all have interacted with the healthcare system in one way or another, I'm sure, but as you know, it's going through some significant changes, and it's the focus is moving from a very fragmented and disconnected experience to a much more connected and and automated and proactive experience. So we no longer look at ourselves as a technology-enabled healthcare company, but we're really a technology company that's operating in this digitally connected healthcare ecosystem. Every single day, I get more and more requests to be a part of the ecosystem rather than being a standalone entity that provides our service to the industry. So if you go to the next slide. And so we embarked on this journey a few years ago to say, okay, if we're going to be part of this connected ecosystem, our architecture has to change. We have to move to a modern architecture from a legacy monolithic architecture approach, which is so prevalent in healthcare. We had to move to an event-driven architecture that's based on microservices and APIs and can easily connect and scale and all those sorts of things. And we developed a beautiful architecture that we wanted to implement. And then we commenced to transform, and we struggled. We struggled to get this to transform at the speed that we wanted to transform. We struggled to get the traction. Some of that is balancing business priorities with the investment in the future and the needs of the now and those kinds of things. But as I dug more and more into it, and was doing some research, I kind of had a light bulb moment and developed what I'm affectionately calling Mark's theorem of architecture, which is not a real catchy name. I get it. I probably need to come up with something a little more catchy, but I'll explain what it is. So you all are probably familiar, if you've been around technology at all, on Conway's law, but essentially Conway, I believe it was in the 70s, said that essentially organizations design systems that mirror their communication structure. And so essentially, said another way, if you have siloed entities in your organization, your systems themselves will be siloed. And we did kind of I did kind of a deep study with Charles Array, who wrote the book, The Quantum Age of IT, which is what's pictured there, around Conway's law and this, the culture of technology organizations. And I started to kind of connect some dots with that. But the light really came on as I was working on transforming our DevOps functions, and we did some work with the authors of the book called Accelerate, which is put out. They actually update it every year, the DevOps report. But in Accelerate, they talk about a study that Westrom did that basically says good culture in a technology organization optimizes information flow. And I kind of had an aha moment, and I said, well, if you put Conway's law together with Westrom, you actually get that your organization's culture will actually drive the architecture of your systems. And so what that aha moment did for us is as a leadership team, me as a leader and then my team, we shifted our focus from kind of a top down, here's our beautiful architecture, thou shalt implement it this way, to let's go create a culture that leads us to this architecture that we want, using these two principles. And our acceleration has been exponential since we kind of changed our focus there. So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll just talk about the playbook that I devised that we're running. It's essentially for our digital transformation. We set the North Star, and we said we want to be this is dynamic learning organization, is the way Charles Array, who talks about this technology organization of the future, the technology organization that our business partners want and our industry needs. But so we're going from this kind of reactive and task-oriented technology organization to this dynamic learning organization. And that's really what our digital transformation is all about. But in order to do that, you have to attack this change across multiple vectors. Mark's theorem of architecture says you got to do two things together. You got to change your architecture at the same time that you change your people and your culture. So those two vectors are working together. And I'm not going to go into all the details of this playbook other than to say, if you want innovative and flexible and adaptive and connected architecture, you've got to have innovative and flexible and adaptive people and culture. And so we're at the same time that we're moving to this event-driven architecture and doing things like domain-driven design and introducing fitness functions and all of the best practices around software development, we're also driving a culture of accountability and commitment and focus on our business outcomes and mentoring and driving the concept of T skills. So we have team members that can fill in for each other and are not siloed in skills and therefore not siloed from an organizational standpoint. We're also changing our operating model. Obviously a focus on moving towards an agile delivery model, developing a technology product-driven organization instead of a technology itself driven organization. And we're using prioritization, and everything's backlog driven and roadmaps, and we're really moving to this cloud first, automation at the core, and really a self-service kind of platform for both our teams and our business partners. And that's what's driving an empowered workforce and agility, and frankly that CB talked about as well. And so then we're also changing kind of how we manage the business of technology, focusing on business outcomes instead of projects, for example, and those kinds of things, and really measuring ourselves against, are we achieving the outcomes? And that's kind of enabling us to really focus on our users and really have a user first or an adoptive kind of mindset. And then lastly, which is really where the folks like Equinix and Google, for example, are enabling us through cloud infrastructure to have, to really change the way our applications are available. Both, we have hybrid infrastructure that's isolated, has fault tolerance. The telemetry that we have today around what's happening in our environment is staggering. The visibility that we have because of adopting the digital technologies, and it's really gotten us to a place where our infrastructure, infrastructure is everywhere, but it's becoming, it's both highly available, but it's also disposable. So we've got something that's not working, we can just kill it. We can stand up a whole new instance right beside it and be back up and running virtually instantly. We've got self-healing happening all throughout the environment. So it's really digital transformation, I guess, and then I should finalize it by saying we're driving a culture of data-driven decisions, focusing on being proactive in forecasting and really looking at our business outcomes. So it's really putting all those things together to create this culture that enables a digital architecture and a team that can really participate in a connected ecosystem. That's what we all want healthcare to become. So we believe that this is a core piece to helping drive the entire healthcare industry. So with that, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for introducing us to a case study, an application of Conway's law to your particular case, and expanding on it and applying it. It's full of lessons. Most of us will benefit from your presentation, I know for a fact, and I'd like to come back to you with a lot more questions. We next move to our last presenter, and we're doing pretty well on time. We have we have 20 minutes left, so we're doing good. We'll be able to take a lot of questions.
Okay.
Next presenter is Olli Junila. Welcome, Olli. Nice to meet you. And
Thank
I believe
you,
you're in Atlanta, right?
Thank you, John. And by the way, my son is in Georgia Tech. He's a third-year student of mechanical engineering, so Oliver. So he loves the school, by the way. So thanks for keeping him honest over there. Let's put it this way. So anyway, thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Many of you remember that Nokia used to do devices, and I'm sure you still many of you miss our the devices which you couldn't break even if you wanted, and the battery lasted like a month. But sadly, we are not doing devices anymore. We are actually in the network business mainly, and I'm going to talk 5G in my presentation, and you heard from many of the previous speakers talking about the networks and the 5G, which are the key for this case. I'm actually based in Atlanta. I've been here 15 years, but as you can hear, I still don't have too deep Southern accent, so it's still pretty much Finglish. So try to understand at least half what I'm saying. So here we go. So let's go for the next slide, please. So just a couple of slides. As I said, we don't do devices anymore. We are in the network infra. So we are about 22 billion currently last year. we've spent about 130 billion in R&D, which is the key for our type of the business in the past decade. In 5G standards, essential patents, we are number one in telco software, and number 2 in global telecom infra. So if we go to the next slide. And of course, we are a global company, so we are all over the place. And actually here in USA, we have our biggest customers, and we are providing the telecom infrastructure for the biggest customers over here, like AT&T, Verizon, Sprint used to be now part of the T-Mobile. We have our Bell Labs over here in North America. And then of course, Nokia is the Finnish company, not the Japanese company like some people think. So it is the Finnish company. So we come from Finland, and that's where our head office is located. So the next slide, please. And you know, since we are all over the place, we have 5G is the key, as you heard from previous presentation, Janu, Raja, and CB also mentioned on the network side. So 5G is the key, will be the key next 10 years. We have currently about 160 commercial 5G deals, more than 220 5G agreements, and we are already live with the 5G in 63 networks globally. So next slide, please. So the 5G transformation. So I try not to go too much details on the technology, but I'm sure most of you have heard about 2G, 3G, 4G, and those have been the technologies and always improvements for the technology. It has been pretty linear. So first we started with the voice, then slowly went to the data. You remember when, especially the 2007, when the first iPhones were introduced, and you know, all the apps came in the game, and then the networks have improved. But now when we go to the 5G, you know, it clearly is a discontinuity in the sense. So it's a quantum leap for totally the new era we are having. So it's clearly 100 times faster, 100 times more devices, minimum 5 times more responsive, and coming back to latency, what CB mentioned in his presentation. And the changes like this, they only come about every 10 years. So it's funny about the new technology, the main technology introduction, it takes about 10 years. And now, as I said, the 5G is by far the biggest. And what's the reason? The previous technologies, I mean 2G, 3G, 4G, mainly in the consumer only. Some you know, the areas, other areas also, but has been mainly consumer. But now we are entering in all over the place. You know, 5G is hitting left and right, everything you are touching. It's not consumer only. It's any industries, automotive, healthcare, smart cities, others. You know, you just name it. It's getting there. And as mentioned, both Janu and of course CB, also the web scale players like Google, Amazon, you know, Microsoft, all of those guys are now getting into this one, which they were not clearly part in the before. So this is really bringing lots of new players also for this infra, and it's going to be open systems, virtualization. So it's been pretty fast. Systems were quite locked. You needed to buy from the one vendor. So now it's when it opens, you know, and virtualization. So software is the key for this one. And it will definitely have a greater impact on the society. And as we seen in the presentations, like in the first one with Janu, you know, the COVID and others, we've seen it in our networks. You know, it's been unbelievable during the COVID time. You know, the increase of the data which has been over there. It was a surprise for us, but happily mentioned that, you know, we haven't had any issues on that side, so we've been able to manage it. So we can go to the next slide, please. So then, of course, when we are talking about this 5G digital divide, so what's the baseline for that one? How do you make it happen? So of course, network vendors like us, you know, the baseline is the previous networks which we build primarily based on those, and it was consumer based. Now we are building 5G on top of that one. 4G is not going anywhere, so it will be still the baseline over there. Then the one important topic, I'm sure you've heard about the different frequency bands. You know, 5G will introduce now the low band, mid band, high band, and many of you heard about the C band, which was the biggest, almost 100 billion auction in USA, just ended a month ago. Big operators, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile spent a ton of money to get to that one, and that's get the mid band, which is the so-called C band. So, and because of those different characteristics, you can do a ton of different things which we were not able to do before. So, and of course, this brings to all the architectural changes which will then make all of this one happen. Initial focus for the 5G, you know, actually I'm sure you've been hearing it a couple of years already, but it has been going steps. So bear in mind, it will be, it's coming. There's basics now in place. So consumer mobility and so-called fixed wireless access is there, but more is coming as we build up the system and get them more up and running. So lots of new toolkits, tools are coming, and for the basic consumer, I would say the gigabit per second speeds will be there for everybody, even in the rural, when we start to get this system up and running. Next slide, please. So then at least one slide for the use case example. So this really is now the first time we are able to do the lots of fancy new stuff with this 5G and like video surveillance and drones, supercharged IoT, connected self-driving vehicles. So we are actually doing a couple of the pilots as we speak with the companies over here in USA. Not allowed to mention the names, but you know what the companies usually build the cars in USA. So we are doing some self-driving testing with them already with the 5G. Then the real-time translation, fixed wireless access, like I mentioned. So that's one of the key elements, especially in the rural areas. We can bring these speeds quite easy. You don't need to bring the fiber over there. You just put the tower and build it up with the 5G and beam to the area. And then, of course, mobile augmented and virtual reality and gaming. Gaming is a big thing over here, so that's also. And then comes the latency, which again CP was mentioning. So in all of these, and healthcare, of course, as we said, all of this needs to be. The only way you can do it is that it's almost zero latency. So that's how it's going. And the networks, how do we build them? We build them one of these use cases. So we're using so-called network slicing. So it's going to be easily managed. I think my last slide, we can go for that one. So I'm not stealing too much time on that. It's quite, I should have a fancy last slide, but I thought, I'll put the standardization over here because for the business like what I'm dealing, it's the key. So, and it has been really key in the past. It will be the key also in the future, even there will be some changes, but it is the key. So it's called 3GPP radio evolution. Current release is 16 and 17. So you can see that we are building these with all the players in the game to make sure that the networks works globally and you can use your device anywhere you like, any place you are, and all of that works seamlessly. And last but not least, the security is over there. So that's it. I'm ending over there. I wanted to make sure that we have some time for questions and answers. So
thank you very much, Olli, and pleasure to meet you. I hope you have a chance to visit the Georgia Tech campus when we go back face to face. Well, we have time for questions, which is great. We have about 10 minutes, and I'll lead off by asking some generic questions, which we have thought about, but there are so many possible questions to ask. One is, and many of you have talked about it, and we had a slide on it, I think, from one of you, the impact of COVID on digital transformation. We were all aware of that, but what will be the lasting permanent impact in terms of business practices, in terms of societal behavior that you as technology leaders can anticipate and react to, or really proact to? And this is directed at all of you. Obviously, the trends have been underway for a long time and they much predate COVID, but the specific impact of COVID has really has been a behavior changing moment in our history. So what will be left? What will survive? How will you implement it into business relevant programs for society at large and for business customers and government agencies?
Yeah. What's going to be left over or what's going to disappear? I think a lot of face-to-face interactions are going to be put on the back end for now. That comes from consumers, that comes from shopping experiences, that comes from online buying. I think from a digital transformation perspective, we will actually evolve into something completely new and different, which is where I call the distributed edge solution sets that will almost serve as human interaction, where things can be done at very, very near real-time pace. reducing the need for, physical contact. Does physical contact come back? Absolutely. Do office spaces come back? Absolutely. But in my opinion, I think we end up in a very, very different way of living, at least for the foreseeable future.
Same question to CB. CB, you talked you had some great slides and thoughts on the digital advantage. How do you relate that to the practices that will survive once we go back to a post-COVID world? Well, pre-COVID world.
I know till now, I mean, I think digital transformation is not a new word. I mean, it's been on for the last 15, 20 years in a center stage. What I think COVID has made people realize that it's not an option, it's not a choice, it's not something that you also do, but it's almost the first, only, and the most important thing that you do. And I think that kind of realization of putting that right in front and center of everything that's happening, I think has been the biggest change. And so there is no element, there's no optionality anymore in that as a focus. And that's what I think is exciting, but also gives an opportunity for companies to start realizing that it's almost like a wake-up call for every company.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Thank you, CB. Mark, I cut you short there. Please, of course, in the field of medicine, the practice of medicine, but the interrelationship between supplier of services and customers and clients, lots will be changing, I think. How do you react to that question, that generic question of post-COVID digital transformation impacts?
Yeah, I was gonna come at it. You're spot on from two directions. One is that the industry that we're in, the explosion of virtual care is beyond exponential, and that's part of that ecosystem that we're dealing with. That's not going to change, because prior to COVID, there were theories that it wasn't as effective. The same thing with maintaining an organization's culture. Our culture, we felt very tied to being in the room together, problem solving, using whiteboards and those kinds of things. And we're like, oh, we want to have an in the office kind of culture. And thanks to COVID, that forced us to think differently in both of those arenas. We've proven that we can be as effective, and if not some cases more effective with our culture in a virtual environment, because of the flexibility our teams have. But in the world of healthcare, there is the same, because now medicine doctors, providers are finding new and more innovative ways to interact with patients more regularly than before, because it's so easy just to connect. And so I think it's been a forced experiment where we've disproved some previous theories about the lack of human physical connectivity, which is still very important in maintaining those things, both culture and the relationship with your providers. But I think you're going to see it's a complete jump shift in the industry and what's normal.
Next quick question, and they're not quick questions, they're complicated questions, but Oli, you had a great chart showing the different areas in which you were involved, from drones to surveillance to enhanced IoT. Then the question, which is addressed to all of you, but we have limited time, what technology trends are you seeing as emerging in the immediate future in the digital transformation beyond the ones we're aware of? What are the trends of the future, in other words?
Yeah, well, I guess we go for Mars, like Elon Musk says. So let's and as you heard, Nokia, we're already in the moon. So I'm sure you heard Nokia is in the moon. Yes. So we go to Mars next. So we'll see. And by the way, I forgot to say before I get further, just to make sure that everybody understands, since you got your COVID vaccination, you didn't get the 5G with that one. So you still have to pay for it. So pay for operators. So 5G doesn't come free with the COVID vaccination. So I wanted to make sure that one. So, but yeah, so it's a John, sorry, I was joking.
No, that's interesting.
So there's ultimate, there's so many. I'm telling you, so like I said in one of my slides, also we have done more than 100 different use cases with our operator partners. And now, of course, like I said, the opportunities are endless. Now with the web scale players like Google and Amazon and Microsoft and others, we are doing a ton of all kinds of stuff which nobody even understood that we can actually do. So it's not too much to share on top of those, and some of them are not even public yet. But there will be plenty of new stuff which we haven't seen before. So
okay, any of you wish to provide an answer to technologies of the near future, areas which have a great deal of potential and are sort of new on the horizon line?
Yeah, maybe I'll respond to that. I think two areas, one where Mark was talking about in the healthcare. I think remote surgeries, remote consultation are going to really explode, from a technology perspective. And also, I think basic consumer, buying patterns will change, where you don't have to actually try on a dress. You can just stand in the mirror and see how that dress will look like. So there'll be some impact from a purely consumer level, how consumers interact with a digitally transformed company. And there'll be, business to business healthcare, I think has leapfrogged during this time, as Mark mentioned as well. So I think those are some near-term technology changes, including the backbone infrastructure. I think we're going to go from a hub model to spoke model of distributed networking back again, where data analytics will reside much closer to the decision-making process rather than in the central hub per se. And those changes will really impact. I think there's trillions of dollars worth of impact that's going to happen over the next few years.
Oh, I can't agree more. Just picking up on that, I think one of the changes that we've almost underestimated or not anticipated enough, which we need to look at, is just the element of real-time data that's being created and produced in the actual real-time edge, in terms of just where it's actually being produced. That is going to have such a profound effect across all industries: sports, multimedia, healthcare, consumption of video, everything. We're creating and also consuming data in the edge, in places which were not there before. And that is going to spawn all kinds of demands and also applications coming out, which I think is something that's, we've got to just watch and make sure we manage that.
One last open-ended question, which has many sides to it. Is digital transformation we've been talking about happening in the same scale and the same pace globally across different national settings, different national cultures, different regions of the world, or of course seeing the emergence of non-US based rivals? China has its own way. Is this leading to a form of digital nationalism? But really the question is the question of scale and play and pace differentiation in terms of digital transformation happening in reality. What are your views on that?
Well, I think, like you just mentioned, John, that the China definitely, and especially with the 5G, actually, China has been really driving. I think USA had a slow start, but now it's been catching up, and now with the new the spectrum and others will definitely catch up over here. Europe, of course, a bit behind, and then of course, jokes aside, there will be 6G, by the way, and the 6G already USA has started heavily, investing on that one. So, like I said, it takes 10 years. So now USA is one of the leading in that one too. So over here, I see lots of push, but globally, I say China is definitely putting a ton of money, like you said, and then Europe comes up.
Geopolitical issues aside, right? I think competition rises all boats. In our view, our philosophy is that there's enough for us to be had around the globe by everyone, and there is economies of scale in play that enable all of us to be successful and create a much more better and connected world that we need to do.
And then finally, do you think we'll ever, I'm sorry, somebody else wanted to interject. Did I cut you short? I'm not seeing you on the screen. No. Rich DeMillo told us about the cybersecurity challenges. So as you move forward with these new innovatory systems, what cybersecurity considerations are you injecting in the implementation of these innovations? And in the field of medicine and healthcare, that would be paramount, I would say, in terms of protecting. In fact, one of Rich DeMillo's example was the case of an oncology company which had been hacked with a view to access patients' files. Mark?
Yeah, for sure. We have a tremendous focus on not only cybersecurity technologies. I mean, I mentioned over 100 million patients that we work with. We process about 100,000 transactions a day associated with those patients. So you can imagine the volume of protected health information that we have in our systems is enormous. And the best way I can describe it is our investment in cybersecurity is growing, is outpacing our investment even in some of the architecture modernization and frankly new product development, probably by 3 to 1 right now. Now that's just kind of a jump shift reaction to some of the big things that have been happening recently from a cybersecurity perspective and more of a level set, but I don't see it returning to the levels that it was before. So cybersecurity used to be kind of a small part of the technology organization. It's a centerpiece of our organization and our culture as well.
Thank you, Mark, for this insight. Any of you gentlemen wish to inject more insights into the question of cybersecurity as a component of the innovatory process for new applications in digital?
I think any digital transformation, for all the benefits it brings in, it comes with its own baggage. One of that is exposure of privacy, of security, of access, of all kinds of intrusions that happen. And I know we've got a whole session on it next, which I think is leading into it. But
indeed,
it is something that's got to be central to everything that they do.
Very good.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Very well. I think we have reached the end of our session. I want to thank you very much for sharing your insights and your presentations. As you know, the session was taped, and that's we will share it with our audience and interested parties. Again, thank you very much. We're next moving to session 3, which is titled Cybersecurity as part of your digital edge strategy and architecture, which is some of the questions we were raising as we ended our own session. It will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Brian Canada. Annie, do you want to transit through the next to the next session, session number 3?
Yes, Brian, please join us.
Mm-hmm. Hello.
Welcome.
Greetings.
Hi. Thank you.
How are you, Brian?
Hi.
Good. How are y'all?
Good to see you.
Wonderful. Apologies, Brian. We are running a few minutes late, but on to you.
Okay, terrific. Well, welcome everybody to our cybersecurity panel, session number 3. We have a very exciting panel for you today. All of our speakers are highly accomplished leaders in their respective fields. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep everybody's introductions relatively short, and I'll refer you to today's program book for further details about everyone's background and their bio sketch. But let me introduce our panel in the order in which they will be speaking. First off, we'll have Michael Montoya, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for Equinix, which is one of the world's largest data center and interconnection companies. Michael has extensive experience in enterprise IT support and has held several executive roles with Microsoft, FireEye, and EMC. Lakshmi Sharma is with Google Cloud, where she serves as the Director of Product Management for Networking. And as I read her bio in the program book, I found it really interesting and refreshing that that she had been working on a number of projects that were both successes and failures. And I think that's something that's particularly important for my students to hear. And I hope that some of my students are here listening in on today's presentation, and maybe she'll provide some insights on both her successes and failures. Ravi Venkatesan is the Chief Information Officer for what was formerly known as USA Technologies, and just within the past few days had rebranded itself as Cantaloupe, which is a world leader in autonomous retail and unattended point of sale systems and IoT devices. And finally, Dr. Flavio Villanustre. He is the Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Technology for LexisNexis Risk Solutions, which is part of RELX, which itself is a global provider of information-based analytics and decision tools for professional and business customers. So I think Ani has everybody's slides. I was going to take a moment to talk a little bit about USCB. So I'm representing the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, where I am the department chair for computer science. I'm also an associate professor of computational science, and I want to take a moment to just, what is my role? What is my connection to this panel? Well, USCB is about to launch a cybersecurity concentration as part of its Bachelor of Science degree program in Information Science Technology. That program itself had just launched within the last couple of years. And what we're aiming to do is, well, what we have done is developed a cybersecurity concentration in that major that aligns itself very well with the requirements for a certification in to become certified as a Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense. And that certification comes from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the National Security Agency. And we are offering no less than four cybersecurity courses in the fall, a couple of which we have offered for a few years now, introductory course in computing security, and something we call, computing security principles, which is historically has been the follow-up course to that. But we're also offering a new digital forensics course, introductory digital forensics course in the fall, as well as a new graduate 500 level course in computing security principles. So I just wanted to throw that out there and just let y'all know that this is something that's very important to USCB. It's something very important to our region. USCB is launching this initiative as part of a South Coast Cyber Center, which recently received a $1.3 million grant from the Department of Defense, specifically their Office of Economic Adjustment. And the startup of our new cybersecurity program will be driven by, or be funded rather, by a significant portion of that grant. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can email me at bcanada@uscb.edu. But I don't want to take too much time away from the headliners of today's presentation. Let's get started with Michael Montoya. Michael, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Hopefully you could all hear me okay. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Hey, you might want to advance to the next slide, and if you don't mind. But I think we got about 10 minutes just to kind of set context of a conversation on where we think cybersecurity is going. As mentioned, I've been in the IT security industry probably longer than I care to imagine. And we have definitely seen this space evolve over the years, especially over the last, probably since around 2010, 2012. We've really seen the clock start to really accelerate in terms of the diversity of threats that we're seeing, the maturity of the threat actor communities overall, and in general, just the challenges that are happening, not only at the enterprise level, but just across, governments, communities, individuals. This is one of those topics that just goes beyond just any specific group, as you even heard from some of the folks in the previous session. But from my perspective, it kind of comes down to a relatively basic math problem, which is, given the academic institution we're talking to, I thought they would appreciate this. But, if we were in a larger forum, I'd ask you what this number means, 280. And I can assure you it's not my IQ. But, it's what it is, and I'll just get to it because given the format here, this is the number of days. And keep in mind, there's some still debate on this number, but it's relatively within a pretty tight band of days. But this is roughly the number of days it takes for an average organization to detect that there's some sort of bad issue going on in their environment, i.e. a cyber attack going on. You look at just even the latest SolarWinds activity, which is in the news constantly, where you see that at a minimum there was probably about 15 months where one or most likely more threat actors were involved in getting much greater access to organizations. But this is really one part of that math problem that we're addressing, is the fact that it's just taken us far too long, not only to detect that someone's in our environment doing something wrong or have unauthorized access to our environment, but our ability to respond to that and really contain that as well. And if we go region by region, these numbers start to vary. I mean, I spent most of my career in the greater Asia region, where these numbers at some point go in the years versus just months. And there's parts of the world where, it's closer to 3 to 5 months. But nevertheless, this is a big problem that most organizations are facing, is just that ability to detect that they have a problem in their environment in general. The second part of the equation, if you move to the next slide, is, this is not my age, as you can tell, definitely. But this part of the equation is, this is how long we have to respond in terms of minutes. So if you look at some of the most advanced threat actors, and this specific statistic I pulled from some work I do with CrowdStrike, as well as what they're doing specifically in terms of their reporting. This is how long it takes. If you look at a cyber kill chain, which is how we look at the whole evolution of a cyber attack, there's a point they get into our environment, which we call point, starting point one, or the staging point. For them to move to that next point, to start to move laterally in our environment where they can start to execute their overall mission, it takes them on average, some of the more advanced threat actors, about 18 minutes to do that. So if you think about that basic math problem, right, 280 days, or what roughly, I think that equates to like 400,000 minutes roughly, that it takes us to do something. It takes them 18 minutes to start their execution. And this is the fundamental challenge we're dealing with. And this is not a trivial issue. Threat actors themselves have just become so mature over the past several years. The supply chains of threat actors, how we attribute threat actors, because the reality is, there used to be just the nation states that we were worried about, but the reality is most of those nation states are sharing a lot of their tactics with more cyber criminals. In many cases, they are, similar attribution. It's actually the nation states maybe getting involved in different types of cyber criminal activities. So it's really difficult for us to say, hey, it's just the nation states that are this advanced. The reality is, with the supply chains and the maturity of the threat actor community, they are just advancing at a much faster pace than we're comfortable with, and they're able to achieve results like this. Now, you add to that, if you go to the next slide, the fact that we have a whole new surface area coming up with us, right? So, you've heard earlier in the 5G expansion and IoT, we have, by estimates, 50 billion devices joining our environment through IoT, sensors in the medical space, in our homes, industrial controls and critical infrastructure. There's just a tremendous amount of surface area that's being added on a day-to-day basis as it relates to what we have to protect. And this is becoming a really large challenge. Everything is getting pushed to the edge now. And I'll talk a little bit about this in terms of some of the trends. And then, of course, as part of that transition, is we're seeing a lot more people just join the digital environment in general, whether it be digital economy, first-time internet users, where suddenly now we're having this much greater footprint across the globe of not just devices, but users as well. So the surface area for threat actors to go and do damage is just expanding rapidly around us. And there's just absolutely zero there's very little doubt on that cybersecurity is one of the largest global risks that we're dealing with as a global community. And this is why World Economic Forum continues to highlight this as something that we have to just continue to address at a global level. So some of the trends that we're seeing, and certainly at Equinix, what we're dealing with as well, if you go to the next slide, is how are we trying to address these problems, right? And where is security moving from our perspective? And we've seen this for some time now. And number one, I think you heard about this in the last topic, is the edge is becoming this new frontier. And what does that mean by becoming the new frontier? And what it means is that, and think about our own remote workforce scenarios right now, where suddenly many people went from the classroom or went from their office suddenly to working from their home or working from what we call a maybe non-trusted environment. And we can't interrupt that in any way. And that's part of the new norm that will continue to evolve, is that we're going to see more distribution of how people are creating information, consuming information, distributing information. And we have to move everything about security out to the edge. So the control plane, the management plane, the data plane. And one great example that's very tactical here, you think about VPNs for a moment. And today, the way a lot of VPNs work, or VPN architecture works, is people, they get inside and they go and they log into their VPN network. That takes them to a specific gateway somewhere that may be in a different country or complete different region. And then suddenly that's where all of that control plane and management plane of security happens. That's just not how the world is working anymore. We have to get all of that security capability as close to the device, as close to the user, as close to the data as possible. So we're continuing to see more and more of that security functionality move out to the edge. And that's one of the things we're working on here at Equinix as well. Security is code. Now, come back to that 18-minute problem. And the reality is, for the most advanced threat actors I've seen in my experience, I've seen major infiltration happen within seconds. So somebody gets in and literally within 3 minutes, you have 60,000 endpoints that could freeze up on you. And those are very automated. Those are very bot driven. Those are very machine learning based type attacks. We have to be able to respond the same way. We cannot respond in a more antiquated way by hoping we can get some signature that helps us protect. Then we get a responder on it and do some areas on that front. So in terms of how that translates to how we're doing security, number one, it has to be intelligence led. We have to get a lot of diversity of signals, and this is changing how the community is working together to exchange that intelligence. Machine learning has to be at the core of how all of those signals are processed and enriched. And then all of that enrichment needs to instrument in a very automated way all of these sensors that live out there, whether it be our mobile device, whether it be the data we're trying to access, whatever service that's running, it has to be automated based upon that security as code platform. And then I'll end, because I know I'm at time here. The final challenge that we're dealing with in cybersecurity that we continue to work towards is, how do we address the rise in data sovereignty realities, privacy regulations, and this concept of shared risk models, and really turning compliance into code is something that we're starting to work on. And then how we can do more shared risk models with other providers, because more and more of our infrastructure is shared as we go to cloud providers, and we use multiple cloud providers. And we have to have a way to ensure that we're driving the right data sovereignty regulations, the right privacy regulations, and in general, the right risk management, using a much larger diversity of suppliers in our system. And you hear a lot of this around supplier security. So with that, let me stop there. And I think I've gone a little bit over. I apologize. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're totally fine, Michael. And thank you so much
cool.
for that.
I was getting some warnings on time, so I thought I'd be quiet.
No problem, no problem. So for those of you in the audience, if you have questions for our panelists, we're going to save the Q&A period for the very end after all four panelists have had a chance to give their remarks. But feel free to use the chat or Q&A panels to enter your questions, and we'll make sure that those are addressed during the Q&A panel to whatever extent we can, given our time constraints. So I want to turn it over to Lakshmi Sharma from Google Cloud. Whenever you're ready, Lakshmi. Thank you so much for your time, and go ahead.
Yeah, I am. Hi everyone, Lakshmi Sharma, Director of Product Management for Networking, and thank you so much for the intro, Dr. Canada. And next slide, please. Yeah. So what I'll be covering is that, like, from a cloud provider's perspective, that what do we see that the trends, and then the slide is primarily focused on network security and cybersecurity both, and why? Because when customers come to cloud, they are looking for two things. One, when they migrate to cloud, they're coming because they have decided to do digital transformation. They have decided to transform, but most of the journey stays still hybrid. So from the day that they decide that yes, it makes sense for them to come to cloud and do the digital transformation. So and what are the things that they want to keep on-prem? So when we are in that journey, we are almost all the time we are in this journey of hybrid connectivity, hybrid cloud, threat at on-prem, threat at edge, threat in the cloud. So all kinds of infrastructure attacks and all kinds of security when it comes to access on-prem, access to cloud. So we look at that holistic system, and the trends that I will be talking about and the capabilities that I'm going to touch upon will relate to 3 dimensions. So in this picture, what I'm talking about is that in the cloud side, we are talking about safety with secure, transparent, and compliant. And it's interesting that Michael and I, we have not shared our stacks before, but if you kind of compare and contrast, it's kind of same, right? You're talking about more secure, which is kind of a platform that delivers at edge, and platform that can secure you at edge, a platform that can detect, run machine learning algorithms that it is detecting and checking that how, what is your right form of your traffic, what kind of L4, L7 capabilities that your application is using, and we kind of determining that intelligently, and then give you that information transparently that yes, what you attacked is the traffic that is coming to cloud. Is that what you intended your application to receive or not receive, right? So that's a transparency and compliance, because we deal with all kinds of regulated industries, like public sector, retail has its own, financial, healthcare. So then making sure that the compliance that is required, and because cloud is global, Google Cloud is global, then making sure that your data policies, your access policies, all of that are regulated per the industry of the country or the continent that you're in. So that's kind of left. And the right side is that because it is hybrid, and we do partner with companies like Equinix, so they are a good partner of us. That's a public information. So then how do we continue to work on the infrastructure side? And since customers would like to see a similar kind of look and feel, you cannot talk to them in one language when it comes to cloud. And it goes back to the culture aspect that was discussed in the previous presentation. So culturally, how do we comply and listen to the same language, same kind of compliance that kind of fits onto the right side? So looking into both, looking into end-to-end is how transformation, digital transformation happens, or the security happens when customers come to cloud. Next slide. So what is our network security vision? Make network security visible, invisible. So security is not expected to be visible. It should just happen. When customers come to cloud, they expect that, yeah, you're automating, you're protecting it. You're only telling me what happens when I need to know. So giving them control and policies and visibility when they need it is the most important piece of how we look at security and visibility, and how security is perceived in this transformation. Next slide, please. So now kind of going into each of them. So make network security invisible. So simplify security to such an extent that it is totally invisible and engineered into cloud fabric. So what we say is that Google Cloud is an SDN fabric, and simplifying it. What is SDN? It's a software-driven, gigantic kind of fabric that runs literally on the globe. So making security invisible is our goal. Next slide, please. And automated verifiable protection. If I just tell you that, yep, you know what, because you come to cloud, you have come to Google Cloud, and we made it invisible and we made it so simple, then but we need to prove it, right? So how do we make it verifiable to you? Because when you need to verify it for your compliance, we offer it to you. So that's a verifiable and automated part of the protection. Next. So simplified control, because again, in order for you to verify it, in order for you to see that it is automated the way we said that it is automated, you want a control of it, but it's simplified control. If I give you hundreds of thousands of scripts and APIs and user UX or UIs, that will be a mess for you, right? So making it simple so that you know what you want to control, because we have automated a lot of things, is another piece of the way in which customers want us to offer security to them. Next slide. So alert on sophisticated threats. So we will share. I will share some number in the next slides that we see attacks every day, like millions of packets, millions of queries, like all the time, terabytes worth of kind of attack. But Google Cloud, it's there. So, but then how do we want to just tell our customers that this is what is happening? No, not all of them have sophisticated, security organizations to even understand what is happening. So making it easy and making it only providing sophisticated threat alerts to the customers is another kind of question and another request and goal that we have and we see from the industry. Next slide. So at the end of the day, right, security shouldn't be a threatening thing. Oh, you need to secure something. Oh, wow, something wrong is happening. End of the day, customers want to, they want to just run their business. They want their business to be up all the time. That is the bullet number one. And then depending on the industry you are in, whether in a financial industry, hospitality, retail, because everything is digital most of the time. Let's say if you're talking about COVID, almost everything is on mobile device. Everything is on laptop. So when you're talking about these end devices, which are all mobile, all billions of devices, you are going over an infrastructure or internet. And then on that internet, how do you make sure that your account is protected? Because I'm a traveler, I'm going and booking, say, Airbnb or anything so, and I'm accessing my account. How do I protect my account? That's the kind of goal for a financial service, hospitality, or a retail organization. But how do you do that in the background? Shouldn't be visible, and they don't really care for that. But compliance is another. So because as I mentioned, like depending on the industry you're in, financial or like healthcare, that you do have certain regulatory standards that you need to comply. So that is definitely something that the customers and companies want from us. And then fraud prevention. So if some fraud happens, then how do you provide a trail, an audit trail when it happened, so that when the company needs to use that information or when the fraud happens, you provide all the data with all the trail so that you can use it. And this, we heard in previous presentations too, this happens all the time. Then providing that severities and the we call it, let's say, confidence interval that we can provide to these customers, and especially in the online world, it is happening way more than we could have imagined in the non-online world, right? Or let's say post-COVID world, pre-COVID world. Things, post-COVID things have changed. All of this has become very, very important as sales scale has increased. Next slide, please. So this is to show you that, like, when I talk about the software-driven, all these attacks and everything that is happening, this is kind of Google Cloud. This is connecting the entire world through physical cables, undersea, ocean. So this is just to tell you that because we kind of put our own cables in almost entire world. So then we have more kind of control over what we send through them and the security and prevention. So we think of security all the way from top application level to the bottom. And of course, we partner with other vendors in order to extend this physical connectivity as well. Next slide. So this is an important slide. So this kind of shows like two examples of the kind of attack that we see. And then look at this data from 2010, last year, end of last year is when Google first time published the kind of attacks and the scale of the attack that we see almost all the time and we prevent. So if you look from 2010 to 2020, look at the exponential kind of peak that you see close to 2020, right? Last year, COVID, and before that. So digital transformation, which accelerated over past couple of years, you can see the number of, there are 3 parameters, bits per second, packets per second, requests per second. We are talking about terabits per worth of attacks happening on this infrastructure, right? So Google has mitigated the largest DDoS attack known in the world. So there are 2 examples, one from 2.54 terabits of attack bandwidth at a given time. So imagine how much of bandwidth and how much of infrastructure does it take to prevent that attack. And as you heard before, these are very sophisticated attacks. In order to do an attack like that, you're talking about a lot of automation, somebody really technically engineering that attack to even bring a massive infrastructure down. right? And it did not go down. I'm saying the attempt is to. So these are the kinds of attacks that you see. And then you talk about 6 million, this is another attack that we saw, 6 million HTTP attacks, and that happened on one of our customers. The first one was on our infrastructure. Second one was on one of the customers on our infrastructure. So imagining these kinds of attacks happening on one customer of this large, say large cloud provider, imagining the amount, even if you say a fraction of it across hundreds of thousands of customers that kind of come in Google Cloud, combine, how much of attack is happening, right? So, and this has increased over time. So a lot of sophisticated attacks, a lot of kinds of variety of things, HTTPS, just the pure bandwidth attack, volumetric attack. So if this is happening at a global scale, it's very important that we come together as an industry as well and start to look into how do you prevent that and keep infrastructure and customers running. So next slide. So this is basically kind of covering a portfolio. This is my last slide, and there are details, but we don't need to go into that. So now you heard about like volumetric attack, which is kind of volumes of data coming, right? And then you have a session level attack, which is like HTTPS, a lot of sessions coming. How do you protect that in that end-to-end world? You are a mobile user of an organization connecting your application. I'm sitting at home, I'm connecting Google's application. You're sitting at home and you're playing like, you take a service from a gaming company or you take a service from a bank. All of you are accessing that information in cloud from where you are, from your home to outside. You need protection from end to end. What kind of prevention you need? When you come into a cloud, you need like when you're coming, and I'm a customer, I'm a gaming customer, I'm a bank, I'm a Fed or some public sector company sitting in cloud. I need to prevent on the internet facing side. That is the first set of things that you need. Accessibility, access transparency, network protection, privacy, identity, all kinds of security you need to apply. And then when the traffic goes back out of internet, then you need to provide the same kind of thing. So even insider kind of creating an attack on your own application, not even like malicious users, but your own enterprise users may create some kind of attack intentionally or unintentionally, right? And then you need to protect security at hardware level and software level and traffic level, IP level, 4 level, L4, L7, all of it. So this kind of picture shows you like what level of thinking you need to do in order for even one, let's say I'm a bank user and the bank sits in cloud and the bank also has deployment around the globe. In order for just one connection and one service to be accessed, so much of end-to-end from the mobile user, you use reCAPTCHA, you use web security, internet security, infrastructure security, so much of security needs to happen for that one session to operate. And then while there are these sophisticated users trying to attack at different levels. So think security, infrastructure, internet, and it is, as you saw in the two of the examples I gave, the threat has become more and more. And also it is very, very sophisticated, which means we need to be thinking about AI/ML. We need to be thinking defense in depth. We need to be thinking east-west, all directions. And there are a lot more standards that are coming in, and it has to be a collaborative and collective effort across across different sets of organizations. So with that, I just end my presentation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Lakshmi. That was very, very interesting. Again, for those of you who may have just entered in, for those attendees who are just showing up, you're welcome to go ahead and start posting your questions in the chat panel or in the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure to address those for the benefit of the panelists. Next up is, I'm proceeding in alphabetical order by last name. And speaking of last names, Ravi, I'm sorry that I butchered the pronunciation of your last name earlier. I'm going to try again, and you can tell me if I got it right this time. I want to introduce Mr. Ravi Venkateshan. Does that sound any better?
It does.
Okay. So Ravi, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the audience, the key to pronouncing anything Indian with perfect Indian accent is you don't stress any consonant and you don't stress any vowel, and you'll have perfect Indian pronunciation. Be careful, if you do it too much, you'll start sounding Indian. So On a more serious note, my name is Ravi Venkatesan. I lead technology and product for a company called Cantaloupe, and we represent everything that you heard from Michael and a lot of things that you heard from Lakshmi. We have 1 million IoT devices, and not only are they IoT devices, they take payments. So we are in the business of unattended retail, and so they're IoT devices that are connected. They have wireless connectivity. They take payments, and there's nobody watching them. So it's like you can imagine the perfect storm to deal with. But I'll share a few insights with you, and hopefully it'll give you a couple of things to take away, and then we'll deal with questions. And if you want to forward the slide to the next one. The way I've framed it up, and I'm going to try to shave a couple of minutes off of this so that you get some time back. Give you some context of where we are in from a security perspective, top threats from my perspective, and I do a session like this about 2 or 3 times every year. And something I enjoy doing is go back and look at a deck from maybe a session I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago and see what's changed and how much it's changed. So I've got some of those insights for you as well. And then I'll share with you what I view as a balanced portfolio. And I think Lakshmi put it very well that, looking at defense in depth, looking at ways in which you can take a portfolio approach to security is essential and critical, because it isn't just, you can't just do one thing and, rest easy. If you go forward. So this is just, where are we today, right? And I pulled a similar session that I did in 2015. And, I looked at major breaches that were reported at that time, right? And you all probably remember Adobe more than anything else, 150 million accounts breached. Everybody was like, this is ginormous, can't believe it. And it's the granddaddy of all breaches, because if you look at it, everything else, was all 15 million accounts, 4 million accounts. Home Depot made waves with their 56, and Target was in the news heavily with their 70 million accounts, right? That was 2015, just 6 years back. Those were millions of accounts. And you fast forward to last year and you have, Microsoft with 250 million and Estee Lauder with 440. And then you have all those guys at the bottom, right? BlueKai and KeepNet and Camp4. Now you're talking about billions of accounts breached. So if you just look at this picture on the left side and the right side, and that's just 6 years, my boss says I'm an optimist, and he likes to describe a lot of our leadership team as, he says our CFO is always glass half full, and he's kind of in the middle, and he says I'm the glass overflowing kind of guy, and I always remind him, yes, except when it comes to cybersecurity. So when it comes to cybersecurity, I think unfortunately there is reason to be pessimistic, and you can kind of see it on this slide. On the right side, you'll see some information about, what's more critical now, and it's ransomware. So what I've been spending a lot of time in doing is really getting our company trained. We spend a ton of money on training, and we try to make sure that our employees are very well educated in terms of how to prevent phishing attacks and how to prevent malware and ransomware, because those things are gaining much more. Bottom line, you cannot outspend it, and people are pretty tired and angry about what's happening. And in most cases, the phrase better be lucky than good applies to cybersecurity more than anything else. If anybody says they're good, they're lying. They're just lucky if they haven't been breached yet. And there are things you can do to be better and luckier, if you will, and I'll share a few of those. If you click forward. So in terms of top threats, this is another, love looking at what used to be the top threats in, 6 years ago and what's now, right? And what you'll see is the picture's changed a little bit. Malware was a big deal. DDoS attacks, common. They've always kind of held a steady level, but there was a lot more SQL injection. Remember Heartbleed, remember, misconfig stuff and watering hole. These were all the attacks 5-6 years back that we all worried about. And now it's a lot more social engineering. It's a lot more CEO fraud, accounting team fraud. Ransomware has gone absolutely crazy. So this is the bad actors are the same, tools have come in to prevent certain types of attacks, and they have gone on to other types of attacks. And what they've realized is that, you know what, the network security guys, the cybersecurity guys, the professionals, they know what they're doing, and they are much more difficult to penetrate. But look at all these regular users, accountants that are sending emails to their bosses with unencrypted financial data with an Excel spreadsheet attached. Look at that executive assistant who you can call and say, your boss is waiting at this airport and needs something urgent. That has become the weakest link in the chain. It's not the professionals. So training employees that are not in IT or technology or cybersecurity, that's become the top threat from my vantage point in 2020. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but this has become the weakest link. Keep going. You've heard this already, so we could almost skip it, but just to reiterate the fact that you cannot rest easy after securing one layer, right? And Defense in Depth actually provides a much better picture of this. This is one that I always, whenever I evaluate a company for acquisition purposes or just look at, advise a startup on their security, I always pull up this picture and say, okay, what do you have? What do you have in each layer, right? And just go through every layer and make sure that it's covered. This is what I would say is kind of the table stakes approach. And then if you click forward one, I would say, everybody has to spend money on security. There's just no way around it. If you have a business that you're trying to protect, what you can do is optimize it by making sure it's balanced. And this is an example, right? Not everybody has to follow this approach, but making sure that you have a balanced approach across, how are you handling, penetration testing, have enough gear around, whether it's firewalls, whether it is other types of tools that you've used. Recon tools are becoming very popular, which used to not be non-existent earlier. People used to do these paper third-party risk management audits. Now they just penetration test their suppliers, right? So all that is new stuff that's coming and should be used. I think remote network access and contractor access, as you heard from Michael, is a big deal and is a big source of vulnerability because most companies are still using old school VPNs and relying on network security versus implementing zero trust capabilities and zero trust policies. And that is essential if you've got contractors, consultants, offshore engineers, what have you. So a balanced approach is important. That's really what I wanted to share. And hopefully you got a couple of things away from it. If you go to the last slide, that's a summary. Remember, it's not getting any better. The magnitude is amazingly worse in terms of the last 6 years. Spending more is not going to solve it. The idea would be to focus on top threat vectors, focus on training employees, laymen, people that are not in tech, and then use a balanced kind of portfolio approach. Thank you, and look forward to the next session.
Ravi, thank you so much for that. I will certainly have questions for you and for everybody else as we after we get through our last speaker for this session, who is Dr. Flavio Villanostre. Flavio, according to his bio in the program book, evidently was a neurosurgeon in a past life, and I guess being a neurosurgeon wasn't stressful enough for him, so he decided to take up the mantle of Chief Information Security Officer for LexisNexis Risk. And so, Flavio, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Very good. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. I really enjoyed thoroughly all of the presentations before me. I also enjoyed some of the other sessions that were before this one. And certainly cybersecurity is top of mind, I think, in every organization today. As everyone knows, any significant breach makes it into the news. And in many cases, it can be an event that might truly impair that company from doing business for a long time, if not forever in some cases. Annie, if you can let's go to the next slide, please. I try to, though, make this presentation not as much doom and gloom. I'm trying to give you some idea of what the cybersecurity threat landscape looks like. But at the same time, I want to give you some practical tips from a practitioner standpoint, what we do and what you can do to protect yourself from this. So certainly we all know that this is pretty much a new world. If someone told me in 2019 what would happen throughout 2020, I would have probably not believed it. And I think it's probably the case for many of you. We have a pandemic. That pandemic changed the way we do business. We moved to telework. As many of the speakers before me, Michael, for example, said, now people are accessing perhaps sensitive information from environments that might not be the sanitized work environment that they had before, through end devices that might or might not be well managed centrally. And certainly there are needs for collaboration that perhaps made many companies rethink the way they enable this type of digital collaboration across. And as part of the process, they might have relaxed some of their security controls to enable this collaboration, which could be the mistake they made, of course. But we also saw certain types of attacks that took central stage. And I included two of these because this, one of them, of course, if you are in the field or if you are in technology or if you're in a large organization, you heard about, unfortunately, I don't like to use company names in this case, but the attack is known as it, is the SolarWinds attack. This is a very sophisticated and large-scale attack on a supply chain where the attackers could gain footholds in organizations that are using those products, those systems, even without any access, any direct access to those companies initially, and doing this through this software. Others have to do with, well, wider deployment of VPNs and sometimes some of these security access solutions for the edge, which might not be as secure as, or might not be configured securely as expected. And of course, we have seen attackers that became more sophisticated and better organized. Let's go to the next one, Annie, if you can. But of course, all of this piles up on top of the existing world. It's not that the things that we were dealing with went away. All of those are still there. It's just that now we have new things to be concerned about. As you can see, ransomware is still prevalent. And yeah, I do agree with some of my prior speakers where humans are the weakest link in the chain. And yes, it's not necessarily the security practitioners, who also may be the weak link as well, but it's also every other human in the organization and many humans outside of the organization. How about your vendors? How about your clients? And some of the issues that we had before, for example, this imbalance between the number of the number and the knowledge of the defenders versus the number and knowledge of attackers continues to expose itself, and it's still challenging. Not just to hire people in cybersecurity, sometimes hiring expert talent is quite difficult, but also even if you could find every person that you are trying to hire, there is always a resource issue, right? There is how much you can scale and how much you can invest in cybersecurity. Of course, many organizations have made cybersecurity rightfully the center and at the main stage of the organization. But of course, also state-sponsored attacks, which we have seen before, but now we are seeing even more prolific, are continuing to become a significant problem. Let's go to the next slide, please. So yes, some of these attacks happened in 2020, 2021. SolarWinds, I'm not going to talk about it. Florida water system, that might bring you perhaps too close to home. Attackers managed to compromise IoT devices in a water plant where they managed to change the chemical composition of the water. You can imagine how big of an impact this could have. And this might not be just something that happens on a water plant. What if it happens in a more, even a more potentially dangerous environment? And that's not even talking about nuclear reactors or anything like that, which of course could happen. So many times we used to rely in the past on the fact that many of these plants were completely isolated from the world. There was no connectivity. Well, guess what? In a world where you need to have the ability to telework, and in a world where connectivity is important to perform certain operational tasks, Now these plants are not, and these IoT devices are certainly not disconnected from the rest of the world, so they become another threat vector. Microsoft Exchange, how many of you use Exchange? How many of you still use Exchange on premise? Of course, this was one that was quite worrying just a couple of months ago. And for those who have been in some way exposed through this, there is yet another supply chain attack with this Axelion file transfer system, which happened to have certain vulnerabilities that made it critically exposed and also exploited by some bad actors to obtain files transfers through this secure transfer system. Let's go to the next one. So if I was to recommend that you take 3 slides out of this presentation, this is certainly one of the slides that you should take. Slide 5, which is this slide, and slides 7 and 8. We'll get through those. Essentially, how do you get better? What do you need to do if you, because nobody has infinite resources and infinite time, there is no way you can do everything. But you can do certain things, and those things might be the ones that can tackle the low-hanging fruit and or that can give you the biggest bang for the buck. I can't overstate enough the fact that security awareness and security training is absolutely key. Every dollar that you invest there saves you hundreds or thousands of dollars down the road in any other controls. So that is, of course, primary. But also every one of the other controls that I listed here are controls that should be top of mind in your organization. One that you might not be familiar with if you are not in a company that is heavily software engineering oriented is threat modeling. Threat modeling is a technique that was developed in the 2000s to identify risk and quantify this risk based not just on a top-down approach to risk that was used before, but in building it bottom-up, looking at the threat vectors and putting yourself in the shoes of the attacker. This way, you can identify which threat vectors are the most relevant, which ones have the potential for the biggest risk. You can design controls that are adequate for those threat vectors, and you can analyze the residual risk to make sure that you can tolerate the residual risk. Keep in mind, risk never goes away completely, so there is always a portion of residual risk. Others that are quite important as well. Security automation, that was already spoken, and I think Michael referred to that, and security as code. Securing the endpoints. Now the endpoints are center stage because those are pretty much representing any access that your employees and contractors have to the sensitive information in the organization and confidential systems. So securing those endpoints is absolutely paramount, particularly if they are not connecting as much over VPN, if you are moving towards zero trust. If you haven't heard of zero trust, I can't make this long enough to cover that, but it's certainly taking away all of the notion of an implicit trusted environment. No more user network, implicitly trusted. Just because you connect to a network, that doesn't mean that you have all the rights to access everything on that network. And validating that access and the authorization levels at every step. And of course, ensuring that there is appropriate logging and alerting as necessary. Enhanced authentication, that includes what is known as stepped up authentication. Authentication that is an authorization that is commensurate with the risk. If you try to log into your bank account, well, maybe you need to be authenticated in a particular way. If you're trying to see the balance, maybe the authentication should be a little bit higher. Maybe if you are trying to transfer money to another account in the same bank, well, you might need to be authenticated even more. And if you're trying to transfer money somewhere outside the bank, you need to be authenticated even more. Keep in mind, this is trying to ensure that the bank knows that it's you and it's not someone that just happened to steal your credentials and or to compromise your machine and then be sitting there right there in your web browser or your computer as you're trying to do these transactions. Secure software development lifecycle, zero-touch environments, fraud detection and alerting, and of course, if you have this enough size to justify it, at least have your own red team to do your own penetration testing. If you don't have that size or you cannot get to that level of sophistication, at least have a third party help you assess the security of infrastructure. It is only by testing, and again, testing, that you will know if you are secure or not, besides anything that you have applied already in theory in your organization. Let's go to the next one. So certainly, if you look at everything I said so far, well, we have certain indicators that are telling us that things are not getting better, they are getting worse, more complicated, more difficult to secure. The pandemic act as a catalyst for change and accelerated all of the technology change in almost a decade. Things that wouldn't have happened until 2030 are happening now. And of course, attackers who are always opportunistic, they seized some of these new opportunities. The attackers follow the path of least resistance to the money or to the power or to the celebrity state or whatever they are looking for. And we as defenders, we are always playing catch up. As a matter of fact, we want to always stay ahead, but unfortunately, attackers will come up with a new way, and it's probably a good reason for us to stay very alert and learn what they have come up with, and then apply a new method to try to defend yourself. Let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. How do you get ahead? Well, there are three core set of controls that you need to implement. And some of these are very abstract controls. The first one is something that is known as assume compromise. When you design a process, when you design a system, when you implement technology, always assume that that system, that process, that technology can be compromised. There is no way for you to know every potential threat vector that can appear in the future. So you need to assume that someone will eventually find one that you haven't caught yet, and that someone will use a threat vector to compromise the system. So if you assume compromise from the get-go, you will apply certain principles that otherwise might not be something that you think of. For example, you would isolate the environment. Well, if this environment is compromised, do I really want that someone gets into that environment and then pivots to compromise something else? Well, certainly not. Okay, let's segment it out, build a fence around it. So if that gets compromised, something else cannot be compromised as a secondary target. This is known as segmentation, and the extreme example is what is known as microsegmentation. It's building segmentation even to the smaller level of the micro components in your systems. Detection and alerting. If you assume compromise, you know that preventive controls are doomed to fail. Preventive controls, don't get me wrong, they are the second best controls after awareness and training. So every dollar you spend in awareness and training gets you thousands of dollars in saving down the road. Well, every dollar that you spend in preventive controls saves you hundreds of dollars on the road, so it still is important. But detective controls and alerting are paramount as well. If you go from this principle that you need to assume compromise, you need to have control to detect when the bad actors compromise the environment. Those 280 days, as Michael was saying, they are inadmissible in the modern world. 280 days means that all of your data is gone, all of your systems are compromised, taken over, and that may be used even to create harm to others. So unless you have a solid detection system with plenty of tripwires around your environments, with plenty of alerting and monitoring teams that are security operations centers or blue teams that are absolutely aware of this risk, you will be compromised and you won't even know about it. As someone said once, there are two types of companies nowadays, those that have been compromised and those that haven't found out yet. So keep that in mind. Security as code, automation, enforce policies. Policies should not be documents. Documents that essentially require people to read them and to implement them are open to interpretation. The security should be built as policies that are enforceable technically. If you can, convert those policies into code. This is particularly practical if you are going to cloud environments, because they give you the ability to do this. In more traditional environments, well, there might be some challenges there. Orchestrate as much as you can, ensure that you take away from humans anything that is routinary. Humans are good at creating, at innovating, at thinking abstractly. They are not good at doing the same thing over and over and doing it right every time. So avoid mistakes by taking away these routinary things from humans, put those in computers. And of course, minimize any controls that are discretionary. And if you are going to do authentication, well, use authentication mechanisms that do not depend on the human on not making a mistake. The human reads an email, the email says, I am your bank account holder, you need to log in, click here to log in. The human goes, clicks there, that takes them to some random hacker site with a different URL, but it's a lookalike. And the human will enter their credentials, and now their account is compromised. Instead of that, use something like FIDO. FIDO, for those who don't know, have mechanisms to ensure that the authentication tokens are never leaving the device, and that the challenge response happens for the site that actually is requesting the access. So even if the human makes a mistake and clicks through the URL, the FIDO system will prevent that from disclosing any secret that then the attacker can use as a man-in-the-middle attack to compromise something else. And always use least privilege. Someone that shouldn't have access to a system, well, should not have access to that system. And if they need a certain access, well, that's the minimum level of, the maximum level of access that they should get, and not anymore. Let's go to the next slide, which is the last slide. And last but not least, you should never assume that some control that you design today will stay effective or as effective tomorrow. Always test your controls. I mentioned about using red teams or third parties to test those controls. If not, just learn how to do it. But please test your controls regularly. Your antivirus of yesterday might not be as good today. Your URL filtering policies that you design today might not be as useful tomorrow. Perhaps even URL filtering is not useful tomorrow. So please look at your controls every time, test them, and use critical thinking and threat modeling to identify if these controls are still the right controls that are commensurate with the risk and appropriate for this particular threat landscape today. And if you design new controls, always build effectiveness instrumentation in those controls. The effectiveness should be measured regularly, should be part of your dashboards. It should be something that you can evaluate continuously. And as you evaluate that effectiveness, you need to have feedback loops that can not just validate that the effectiveness stays the same, but if it changes, that you can use an optimization process to go back and improve that control and ensure that control stays effective, or the equivalent control will be effective at that time. Just let's go to the last slide. This is just a corporate slide to close with LexisNexis. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Flavio. And I want to remind the audience that if you have questions for any of the panelists or for for the session in general, please enter them in the Q&A panel that's available at the bottom of your Zoom window. We do have plenty of time for Q&A. The session number 4, as I understand, is going to be starting a little bit later than originally planned. So I think we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers. And I do see, I certainly have plenty of questions that I'd like to ask somewhat selfishly as an educator for some of them. But I do want to address one of the questions that somebody has already logged in the Q&A panel from Sam Murti Barath. He's asking, what is your take on using Zscaler or CrowdStrike? Do they help in preventing these cyber attacks and hacks, or do they only help in tracking the threats? Would any of you care to respond to Sam's question?
I can take a little bit of that. One thing that you need to try to avoid is do not fall in productitis and just looking at the product out there and thinking that that is the ultimate solution for you. Those products might be useful in some cases, might not be useful in others. If you apply a more holistic approach to security and use threat modeling, you can see, well, is this product the right product for my environment, for the type of access that I'm providing, for the type of attacks that I might have, and is this product, of course, cost effective? If we have infinite budgets, infinite time, and infinite resources, of course, you can use every product out there in the market, but unfortunately, no company's reality doesn't have any of those infinites. So you need to prioritize based on your own security priorities, and those should be aligned with your business.
I'll add to that. It's great update. I would just say, Sam, they both have very different use cases. As you heard from, I think, a lot of folks in the presentation, there's this concept of defense in depth, and both have sort of different approaches to defense in depth, serving very different use cases. But if you look at it from the algorithm of, every security tool kind of plays three primary functions, right? It helps you, maybe even four, right? The protection element, which helps you protect you from a threat, prevent from that threat, detect the threat, then respond to the threat. Both CrowdStrike and Zscaler apply different use cases to that sort of algorithm there. And like CrowdStrike is very endpoint specific in terms of the device itself and protecting you from, potential ransomware attacks on your device or, your policy issues on your device itself. Whereas Zscaler is more kind of into the zero trust, what now they're calling a SASE model, where they're helping us sort of do away with things like VPNs, which we talked about earlier, and put better controls at the application and at the data layer versus at the, say, the network layer. So different use cases, both, they both serve a very important function in the defense in depth stack. But to Flavio's point, you got to decide what makes most sense for your organization.
I think it is covered well, and just maybe add two more points to what just Michael said as well. So the 4 steps, I think that Michael, you covered very well. Like there are 4 steps to how do you kind of look into security. And so detection and policy, I'll just pick 2 of them. So after you detect, and then you can use organization to kind of set policies around it, right? And then I think Flavio also mentioned that. So detection is one, and visibility until you visualize and detect. So detection, visualizing, and then you putting a policy. So both of these organizations, they actually do really good job in terms of offering you policies so that you can put parameters and controls after you have detected something, right? And then the main difference, from what they offer product perspective, is endpoint security versus infrastructure security. So one of the terms maybe I can also expand upon because my team works on it, which is SASE. So that term is becoming more and more kind of prevalent after Zscaler, I would say, kind of coined it. It's like secure access, secure edge, right? A secure access service edge. So what it really means is that there were a lot of these technologies I mentioned in my presentation: firewall, and then NAT, and then IPsec, and connectivity, DDoS, WAF. There were all these terms and technologies for how people used to connect securely to something. So if I'm at home, I would use something which is clientless or client-based system to connect, and then it gets secured. So what SASE has done in this mobile world, all kinds of endpoints are connecting to something. So how do you securely kind of connect? And then plethora of things that used to exist, just kind of simplified that with a policy-based system. So I just wanted to kind of drop in this word policy, because that's kind of common, whether you put an endpoint or an infrastructure. And then that policy, whether it applies to an endpoint or it applies to an infrastructure, is where these kinds of companies sometimes differentiate.
I would like to add one more thing, sorry to go back to that one, but and it depends on where you are in this security cycle. So if you think that you can do your own zero trust infrastructure better than a third party, then you definitely should be using that. And particularly if you are very sensitive to what happened to SolarWinds and Axelion. Now, if you know that positively it's going to be a big challenge for you to be able to implement this securely, then maybe trusting a third party might not be that bad, and that may be a better option. But again, this is not an equation that will give you the same result for every organization in the world. Depending on where you are, one might make more sense, the other one might not.
Sam, I hope I appreciate the multifaceted view in answering Sam's question. Sam, I hope you got the response that you were hoping for. I have a number of questions, and I just want to briefly summarize. Like we've clearly covered a lot of ground here with respect to such diverse topics as end user security, the need for invisibility of security, considerations from the standpoint of the supply chain and distribution, latency and issue detection, which is what Michael talked about towards the beginning of his talk, security as code, needing to get security closer to the edge. We talked about ransomware. Ravi's point about better being lucky than good, I think was very, very important. So there's a lot, there's a lot of ground that that we can cover here. But I want to start with something that was addressed in one of the earlier sessions, which was about COVID-19. And I wanted to get the panelists' perspective on what you think the audience should know about how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected cybersecurity priorities and strategies for the enterprise on a day-to-day basis. Would any of you care to comment about that?
For us, the big difference has been the number of people that are remote and all the time, right? So that was a new thing to, new paradigm to enter, and dealing with that now, there is no choice but to get to zero trust as quickly as possible, because unlike the earlier days where you could have people within a closed private network, now everybody is on, most people are sitting in a Starbucks and using Wi-Fi now, even though we've come out of the pandemic or are in the process of coming out of the pandemic. So that's a big difference.
And I would add to that. So, and there was a question in the previous panel that, hey, is digital transformation a global phenomena in different cultures and different parts of the world? So I would say COVID has actually made it a totally global phenomena, digital transformation. And at a point then what we saw is that world was not really prepared. And I'll give some specific examples I come from India, and then I have a lot of friends in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam. So in those countries, and I have, we as Google has customers there. So it was so interesting last year, March, as soon as the lockdown happened in various countries, people in many countries of that part of the world, they were not used to working from home. And the infrastructure, and then let us say service providers, cloud providers, security infrastructure, fiber infrastructure, and software systems, they did not see that kind of and amount of traffic and amount of connections, amount of queries coming to these infrastructure, not before from that part of the world. So it has totally changed. It has seen so much of growth. It means like both from infrastructure perspective, what kind of security do you need to kind of provide? Because some of those things might have been seen as threats, to be honest, like if it was 2 years before, because you wouldn't see that number of connections coming from that specific part of the geography. So it's really very, very different. It has changed so much. COVID has changed so much. The whole kind of economy of global scale of infrastructure as well as security that it requires.
There's a question from, by the way, thank you. Thank you so much for your insights on that. And James, who is one of our moderators, has a question. How are companies and platforms addressing the issue of sustainability and energy usage in implementing cybersecurity solutions? For example, some blockchains can be extremely energy intensive. What are companies doing to address this issue?
Blockchain, sorry to take that one a little bit, but blockchain is a completely different technology. Yes, depending on the type of proof that you do and proof of work in particular, like in Bitcoin,
Well, you're saying zero.
It can be.
It's not completely different.
Well, blockchain itself, there is no much of an application specific in security today. So it's not exactly this field. Now, again, proof of labor, like in Bitcoin, yes, it's very intensive when it comes to energy, and it's probably not the most human-oriented type of technology. Unfortunately, it seems to work for some people investing money there, but it's not what might help us as humanity to stay alive for a very long time. So, but no, in security in general, and companies that are, at least I can speak to our own company. We have a sustainability board, and we are well oriented towards ensuring that we are green and trending towards energy neutral around the board. And I think many of the other large companies that we have here in the panel are doing the same thing. We know that sustainability is at key because unfortunately it's only one Earth, and we need to protect it. We won't be here for our children or our grandchildren. And cybersecurity is just part of that, part of how we deploy technology and ensure that technology that we deploy is at least considering some of the factors impacting the environment as we implement it.
That's a very interesting question. So just this morning, I was in another panel or meeting on sustainability. And then Google, like, we are, every bit we transfer, every connection we make, every query that comes, I'm product management head, so we must always think about the footprint that it generates. So it's about cost, but at the same time, the footprint. But why I say interesting, because I've not necessarily thought about this question from the context of like, will security make a difference to it? I think Flavio, you said is that the amount of labor that goes into processing something, and I think maybe that was the intent here. Hey, the blockchain, which is distributed systems on various kinds of machines throughout the world, used by many people with different kinds of APIs. If I kind of translate that to a product definition, yes, it's massively generating and using the kind of machines to a level. And like, even if we just again look at what has happened economically, and just recently or in past couple of months, massive amount of transactions. I also lead something called high performance computing and high performance throughput as a product, say, or business head for GCP. So I run into those kinds of conversations a lot, and we look into that. So yes, it generates a lot of, it requires a lot of processing. It requires a lot more kind of resources than maybe a traditional system would use. But being in cloud, because almost everything that we do is really distributed on small form factors, big form factors, we need to kind of look into access transparency, DRZs of all kinds of data all the time. So even blockchain, the way we would see in cloud, we wouldn't see the result of it or outcome of it so differently because we are already distributed throughout. But yes, the processing and other things would be, the economics would be different. And when we're looking at the economics, we do, at least as part of Google, as product managers, while we look at product cost and what it does, we have to look at sustainability aspect of generating and processing that one instruction all the time. It may not have answered, directly, but I hope it answered.
Unfortunately, blockchain and proof of labor is futile work. First of all, it doesn't generate anything useful other than validate those transactions that sit on the ledger. That's part of the mining process, right? And unfortunately, because of how the mining process rewards the fastest to do it, no matter how much more efficient you can become, someone else might become more efficient. This is how it moved from CPU intensive back in the day, 2010 or something like that, to a GPU intensive, like in 2012, and now to a TPU or whatever they use today, intensive using ASICs. It's a never-ending game, and again, there is no end result that helps humanity in any way other than just generate this fictitious value there. So yeah, for those people making money with that might be quite useful, but it doesn't really help humanity, in my opinion.
I would tend to agree with Flavio's remark, but extending it beyond blockchain and just talking about processing power in general, I think it's a very legitimate concern about just the energy intensity of anything involving higher performance computing. We have a researcher on staff, one of my faculty assistant professor, Kishwar Ahmed. His research is actually in looking at the energy efficiency of high performance computing. Which to me, there's a certain irony associated with that because, when you're doing HPC and you're doing these really high fidelity models and simulations of processes, some of which might be used to study climate change and perhaps combat climate change. How much damage are you doing to the environment just by virtue of trying to model the process that you're trying to minimize? So it's an interesting consideration. I want to get back to...
sorry, there is another question or second part of the question now, which is, there are blockchains that are useful. Yes, there are. We are talking about blockchains that are using proof of labor. as a mining technique. Not all of do that. Some of them do proof of stake, and there are other ways to do proof. And those are not resource intensive, but those are good. Those are fine. Or blockchains that are not public and they don't need to have mining process to work. So yes, there are applications to blockchain. Essentially, this sort of cryptographically signed integrity ledger that work fine. And if you don't use proof of labor, then it's fine. It can be very energy efficient. It's just that the proof of labor is what makes it really problematic, because you need to prove that you're really doing work. It's essentially spending energy.
Ani has a question in the chat. He's asking if anybody would like to comment about the next generation of intelligent networks.
Okay, so intelligent networks. So there is, this is a security session, but I run networking product management, which also includes security, but other things as well. So I can start from some pieces, and then my fellow panelists, please kind of chime in anytime. So, so intelligence, like starting from, let's say, the cybersecurity perspective, right? One of the things that I did mention is that making a kind of detecting a difference between, like, and somebody mentioned like pen testing. If I am doing a pen testing, or if I allow somebody to do pen testing in cloud, or versus a specific amount of traffic that used to come for a very large account, let's say it's a gaming customer, right? Who has hundreds of thousands of millions of, say, user-to-user traffic going on through the cloud. Intelligently, how do you determine whether it is a good traffic versus the malicious traffic? So that intelligence in your infrastructure in cloud needs to be built in. Otherwise, you will keep getting this, your alerts would be way more than your own attack. So intelligently kind of detecting, and based on all the parameters of, like, whether it is volume, whether it is like sessions, or whether it is any kind of user-to-user facing traffic, determining that intelligently, doing it intelligently, making decisions by automating it, and only alerting and recommending, also recommending. So detecting, automating, and recommending and alerting, those are the 4 things that you need to do intelligently all the time. At least that's kind of how cloud works. That's one. Other is that from intelligent part of the system is that we collect a lot of data, right? I mean, it's customers data into their environment, or let's call it segment in, say, Flavio's term, or in cloud terms, we call it VPCs or projects. So we keep collecting customers' data all the time, and telling customers back that from whether it is a configuration data, whether it is your transaction data, so giving intelligence into those systems of, hey, is this a firewall configuration? You don't even use that policy. You have so many policies, like for your forwarding rule, CDN, all kinds of things, or your application security, application to application security. So looking into all that configuration, looking into all those transactions, and making intelligent recommendations to the customers themselves, so that they know that what data to discard at a faster frequency. Otherwise, just the amount of storing that much of data for years, and without even knowing whether I need it for compliance, whether I need it for my business, it is a big mess. It's a big headache for the customers. So intelligence, at least in cloud, customers want to know what data do I use, how do I use, when do I use, and do what business decisions can I make, is a big piece of, like, work that we do. I also run another part of my business is called network intelligence and AI ops. So that's, as part of that, we hear all the time that how do I make AI ops decisions? So, and which primarily is based on configuration and transaction and application data.
Can I ask, so in the context of cybersecurity, when you say intelligence, I think threat intelligence. So is that the type of networks that you're referring to, threat intelligence or cyber intelligence networks? If that's the case, you might be referring to collaboration networks, like, for example, organizations like the financial services ISAC and others, where individuals and organizations in the same space share threat intelligence to try to identify the TTPs for the attackers and perhaps have a common response. Those are very useful. If you can participate in some of those, there are a number of them handled by law enforcement. Secret Service has a number of them, FBI as well, and some even state and local organizations do. And certainly some of the market or market segment type of organizations, like, again, Financial services, ISAC is one of those. The retail organization, I think it's CR ISAC, that's another one. So if you're asking if those are useful, I can tell you that they are very useful. If you can sign up on one of those, you probably should. It can give you quite a bit of value. At least they can help you understand what the threat landscape looks like. And if there is something that is relevant to your business, you can see it potentially earlier than any other place, hopefully earlier than the news. It's important.
Thanks to both of you for answering that. We do have to wrap up, but I think Debbie Slate, who's asked a question in the chat, I think is representative. She's asking a question that I think is representative of a lot of people who are attending this. And so let's wrap up by doing a really quick hot take from all four of you. In 10 seconds or less, would like to hear from each of you to answer Debbie's question, which is, what is the most important thing a startup with limited resources should do for security? What's each of y'all's hot take on that?
Awareness and training. That should be the way where you put your first dollar.
I would say use a cloud platform that gives you all of the elements without you having to pick 20 different tools, as an early stage startup. Cloudflare is a great example.
I would plus one to what Ravi said. So leverage third party, instead of starting wherever. So think about your business problem, right? So what is, if you are very clear on what business problem are you solving, just use something that exists, and you can choose. I would be happy to help you with GCP. If you're a startup, we can give credits for that. But yeah, choose a cloud platform that can help you accelerate.
Yeah, this is probably the ultimate question for security, right? What's the magic bullet? I tell you, there's not one. But if I were gonna apply one thing, I would make sure that my identity access and authorization platform, so how you let people get into your environment and how you secure their access, we call it your identity as the control plane. I would put as much effort around that to make sure that you can secure the identity of all your users as best you can.
Thank you all so much for that. And thank you everyone for participating. Thanks to our esteemed panelists who joined us today. From my perspective, it's been an honor and a privilege to share the screen with y'all. And if anybody, Lakshmi, if anybody wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that?
Lakshmi Sharma at google.com. I will drop in my text.
Okay, terrific.
And by the way, I saw a question on, I know we are out of time. So I also work with, recently I worked with Ethiopian, folks in Ethiopia through Google. So we have been, during pandemic, we coached a lot of people in different countries. Ethiopia or Jordan were some of them. So if you have some work going on, happy to help and partner there as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Lakshmi. On behalf of the panelists and on behalf of the University of South Carolina, Beaufort, thank you so much for attending. We're about to start session number 4, and I'll hand it back over to the hosts.
Thank you,
Brian. Thank you, speakers. This was a very interesting session. Wish we had more time to do justice. Thank you all, and we are recording this program, and we will send you copies in about 7 to 10 days. With this, I would like to welcome speakers for last session of the day, Mr. Chad Schaefer and Mr. Kad. Unfortunately, Irfan Khan, one of our speakers, has fallen sick last night. He reported that he has cough and cold. So we are missing him today and wish him a speedy recovery, and would like to bring him back to our program down the road when we have other events like this. Chad, please join in.
Indeed, I am. How's everybody doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Great. Well, I have your introduction here on the sharing with everybody. And okay. Chad is a business development executive at Siemens, specializing in digitalization. He has about 20 years of experience in delivering programs across automotive, machine building, oil and gas, and metal covering verticals. Chad holds an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from Purdue University, finance certificate from Emory, and smart manufacturing certificate from MIT. So you are Mr. All-Rounder, Chad. With this, I will bring up your presentation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor, and my focus was going to talk about some of the digital transformation and the digitalization aspects that we're facing at Siemens, and also how we're going to market to help others. And as just kind of a quick introduction, we really are seeing a tremendous amount of complexity out there in the industrial manufacturing space. Our roots at Siemens start with electrification, right? Going back into Ohm's law and some very basic fundamental things that bring power to facilities. And we've evolved then into automation. Really, we started with electrification going back almost 172 years. And I'd say in the 1960s and 70s, we came on very strong with automation. And most recently, a lot of our investments and a lot of the direction of our organization at Siemens is around digitalization. And a lot of different definitions out there on the topic. And I'd say that where we've settled on it is mainly, hey, if you can make better decisions based on data, go for it, right? And as you step into those manufacturing environments that are highly complex, boy, you have to deal with a lot of variables as you look at the factory floor operations all the way up into the business decision-making at the top of any kind of manufacturing company. And, in this day and age, I look at the center here, you got brownfields and greenfields, and you need different strategies with how you might enable data or how you might enable digital transformation. So it always leaves you with, where do you get started? And this is a question that we faced as a manufacturer of our own goods. And then we also have clients around the world that need our help. So if you want to step to the next slide, the way that we're interpreting digital transformation today, or digitalization, is that we are seeing a lot of crossover between the digital world, which is the use of software and software tools, and then the physical world, where you're manufacturing and you're producing something. And we're seeing this crossover of combining the digital and the physical worlds through simulation in a lot of different vertical industries. A lot of my background is in the automotive industry, and it's really helpful to have these simulation tools. I think about building a greenfield and going from plowing the ground to bringing a car off the end of final assembly. And I wish years ago I had some of the wonderful simulation tools that exist today, and some of the artificial intelligence tools that exist today to produce cars, and have laborers and really talented, skilled folks working with software every day to build better products. But these are generally the kind of markets that we're dabbling in, and where we're seeing this digital and physical come together. If you want to step to the next one. So I guess it kind of begins with our own facilities. There you see Angela Merkel there. We decided that we had to kind of disrupt ourselves as we manufacture, not just in the United States, but all around the world. And we needed our facilities to be more productive, and we wanted to certainly make sure that the talented people we have, we're making sure we're getting the most out of their skills, right? So back in 2010, we found ourselves at a crossroad where we had to take several of our facilities and transform them and use data to make better decisions in our own manufacturing. So Siemens was definitely a big part of what Industry 4.0 is, and we've been around since Industry 1.0 as well. So we've seen all the gyration and dynamics and evolution of making better business decisions. And of course, we're an engineering firm at heart, right? We want to try and continuously improve. So our goal was really to digitalize our own factories. And for those that are interested, I can share the Harvard Business Review on what we went through in this disruption of our own organization to take on roughly about 30 to 35 facilities are going through this kind of transformational effort. So if you want to step to the next slide. And this deals really with where to get started. And every organization might define creating a digital twin or making better business decisions in a different way. At Siemens, we've kind of compartmentalized that into 3 stages when we look at any facility. One is certainly looking at the design of products, that PLM approach, and those 3D CAD models, and applying physics to them and making sure you can simulate a product before you bring it to market. And then we want to certainly realize its effectiveness in a lot of the MES and SCADA systems and all the wonderful tools that you can have on a factory floor to provide guidelines, right? Kind of those guiding lights or indications of productivity. And then in the final stage, we wanted to optimize and make sure we took advantage of automation. And automation is not a new idea, but it certainly evolves with robotics and cobotics. And we're now at the point where we can take the design of the product, also the simulation of the facility, and we can simulate the code of machinery before we ever pour concrete and before we ever buy or capitalize equipment. So, you know, our philosophy was, hey, if we can make mistakes in a virtual world and apply physics and all the wonderful different engineering methodologies, let's do that, right? Because you're not wasting as many resources, and you got a chance to observe challenges that you may run into by simulating a factory's operation for 10 years, 20 years, and you find ways to improve, you know, the lives of the folks that are working in the plant, as well as the closed looped manufacturing techniques of linking the automation and the quality at the end in the optimize all the way back to your next generation of design for your next product that you bring to market. All right, you can pop to the next one. So again, the digital twin, this is our method. And so this facility here is our Omberg factory where we make PLCs. We're certainly one of the larger producer of programmable logic controllers on the planet. We make a number of other products. And the trend that we're experiencing is that people want customized products, and even they want customization in the electrical components that they buy from us. So we end up with millions of varieties of products running through this factory. And it's really the product going through that quantity of one effect where value is added to it as it goes through the facility. But using those digital twin methods, we focused on speed, agility, quality, and efficiency. And we took a factory that was doing a great job, and we had to move past those basic lean measures. And by using the digital twin and simulating some different adjustments to that factory with software and AI and all these wonderful tools, we were able to make it even better, right? And it was made better for the employees that we have. And keep in mind, you know, this is in Germany, where, you know, you've got a certain kind of government-based system where, you know, labor is really valued and protected, and it should be. And we were able to keep the same headcount in this facility and get more productivity, more quality, more efficiency, and put those really wonderful resources to task on things that we hadn't gotten around to. So we were able to really repurpose and put people in a great position to succeed, as well as elevating the performance of that facility. So you can move to the next. So that's where we put our digital twin methods to work in our own plants. And we can pop to the next one. And I guess what's really important for our employees there that have been working in this brownfield site that was, again, good, but we wanted to make it great. And lean was one way you could do it in the old-fashioned world, but now we're able to simulate automation. We're able to run algorithms. We're able to look at automation versus the design of the product and get that higher mix. And so we're able to run our simulations. Here you can see a rendition in the background with avatars and people walking around. And how does it not just impact the machinery, but how does it impact the people around them? So it's interesting to see that gamification come into the manufacturing environment. And what we're finding, which is really, I think, inspiring, is that young, talented people that are coming out of universities and, you know, gaining their master's degree, gaining their doctorate degree, they want to solve really big challenges, and they're able to use these tools to simulate it before they go into the work environment. So it's attracting talent, and it's an innovative way to bring talented people into the industrial manufacturing environment, which has certainly been a challenge, but we're finding that it's a great way to draw on talent. All right, you can move to the next. And you know, this is probably the premise of where we're building these digital transformation efforts. And I think for years and years, you saw that ISA 95 stack where you had sensors and things that happen at the factory floor, and it should lead up the ladder or up the pyramid to make better business decisions at the ERP and PLM stop. But we're starting to see not just automation, but the evolution of edge devices and the way they play a significant role in manufacturing, with the employees that they complement, with the data that they collect. Certainly we see a transition in our own factories as well as our customers, where, you know, they used to hug their server in the back of the plant to make database decisions on production. And now they're stepping into the cloud and having to deal with cybersecurity, which was discussed at length earlier today. And I really appreciated that dialogue, but it always starts with that cyber conversation before you move into an edge device that's going to complement automation. But we see this kind of tilting model with a lot of the topologies that we implement from an architecture standpoint in our own facilities and those of our clients. But edge is becoming a more popular thing, and it's being embraced. Whereas at first there was some hesitancy, but now I think it's starting to move along as there's more data points out on the factory floor that you can study in intriguing ways with applications. So if you want to pop to the next. So if that's the architecture component, then how does this become real for a manufacturing floor? And here you can see a little bit of chip analysis. And in this case, you're trying to go for that go, no go on quality. And here we're using an edge device that's going to communicate with each of the subcomponents of the manufacturing environment, where certainly there are quality control employees as well as machines doing pick and place activities with components on a board. But we were really limited by the X-ray aspect of quality, and by using AI and training algorithms, we were able to get a little bit more throughput and more vision and more eyes, although they're virtual eyes, on the prize, in addition to the basic quality control procedures. And in our case, we use something called MindSphere. It's our environment that we do our industrial apps that work with our industrial edge products. Like you can see that small industrial PC over there next to the AI icon. But this is a case where we're just looking at chip inspection, but you could apply this to doing welds on vehicles, or you could apply this to deductive or additive manufacturing. We want to use those data points, compress them to an edge device, and help to look at either quality or speed or data or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve in the manufacturing environment. And this does help, I think, more and more. It's not just in discrete manufacturing where you're doing an assembly of a car or an airplane or a chip construction. We're seeing it also in the process industry. So food and beverage, they're looking for different ways to look at the way things are moving through a facility. So process and discrete are starting to step out onto the edge with some devices and move that data to a cloud-based environment to make better decisions. And this is just one example. And then I'll step into really the next one and the final one. And that is just, boy, AI, what is it? We have our Siemens corporate technology folks up in Princeton, and they do a really great job of breaking it down into its easy elements. So, C-level executives can make reasonable decisions on investment in AI. And you've really got to train the algorithm. And that starts with really talented human beings and people coming up with what is the right science behind training that algorithm to make a better business decision. And so machines can really complement the labor you have on the floor. And then you can get into testing and going to that next step. And here's a case where you're looking at a weld defect. So if you can automate some of these mundane tasks in a facility, you free up your team members to do some better projects, right? So anyways, I'll kind of wrap up with that. And I think I had an animation at the end, but I'm not sure it's running. But in this particular case, it's a video of creating a digital twin or a simulation of a piece of equipment. And it shows how the arm tooling, the pick and place, was making some mistakes. And then we were able to make some simulations with PLC code and loop it back around and train the algorithm to improve the way the pick and place happened with the components on the board. So you can actually run a simulation, build the real machine, and then send the feedback into the simulation to see if you truly achieved your goal. So my message here is digitalization is here to stay. I do think that the automation realm that has been the factory floor for many years is finding its way into simulation practices. And we've been fortunate to benefit from that in our own factories first, but then we're also working with clients in the field to address AI, let's say on the factory floor, or machine learning, or we're trying to anticipate a challenge with a machine that might be running to end of life or needs some maintenance. And so the machines are actually indicating when they need help versus that reactionary behavior of a maintenance team. So all these things are really benefiting industry, and we're seeing that it's impacting some of the localization of manufacturing in the United States and the benefit of other markets such as APAC and certainly Europe and Middle East. But it's here to stay, and my job is to try and help people get started, and I hope these examples were helpful.
Thank you, Chad.
My pleasure.
Appreciate your presentation, and I'll come back to you after Kyle's presentation with some questions we have.
Okay.
And with this, we move to our last speaker of the day, Mr. Kyle Shin. He's Senior Manager of Segment Marketing from Equinix. Kyle is an accomplished multilingual a technical technology professional with extensive track record and experiences in product management, business development, and GTM plan execution. Extensive in-depth technical knowledge across various data center and full cloud enterprise IT stack. Kyle has proven record in enterprise partner, relationship management, and marketing program management via cross geography and cross-functional stakeholder management. Kyle, on to you, sir.
Hi, Ani. Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. And it's always nice to be the last session so I can try to keep everybody engaged. I know I'm between probably you and the beer, so I'll try to make it this as interesting as possible, and then we'll go for it. I am the American manufacturing lead for the segment marketing organization of Equinix, and I work with our field team to provide industry insights and consultation to facilitate companies with their digital transformation, right? So really excited to share with you some of the insights that we have found. If you want to jump to the next slide, please. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with Equinix, Equinix provides a digital infrastructure to some of the most mission critical functions across multiple industries across the world. So that includes data center and interconnection services, and also network edge and bare metal services, right? So we heavily utilize data science to understand the industries that we cover. And we have worked with about just a little bit more than 10,000 companies to really enhance their digital capabilities over the past 2 decades. Today, I would love to share some of the trends that I've observed that's impacting the manufacturing industry, and hopefully that will provide some good food for thoughts about enhancing the digital readiness for your organizations. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So when we look at the manufacturing industry, the business requirements may differ a little bit across the subsectors within the industry, but our study shows that all the use cases that address the digital transformation in a manufacturer require enhanced digital capabilities in digital core, digital ecosystem, and digital edge. So the emerging trend that we observed is that more and more manufacturers are moving away from the traditional make and sell model towards a technology and service-based platform and business model. In that transformation, you have to consider data as part of your supply chain and how you would extract value out of it. Like for example, we have a company called Seagate, whose traditional business is manufacturing hard disks and precision electronics, which, you know, in the traditional sense, the traditional supply chains is still very important. But just recently, they also announced a new storage as a service called Live Cloud. And that is also based on the platform Equinix. In this scenario, efficiency of Seagate's digital supply chain is extremely important, right? It's crucial for Seagate to build its digital supply chain on a latency sensitive and scalable digital infrastructure. And that's what we have provided with them. Let me give you another example, Microsoft. Believe it or not, they're also in the manufacturing business. During the Xbox launch, Microsoft utilized a company that offers great shipping rate, but all of a sudden, that company went bankrupt. So with AI capabilities and weather data from third-party sources, Microsoft was able to redirect its shipment from Florida to Memphis during the hurricane season to avoid any delays, right? A third use case that we have seen in the, particularly in the consumer product manufacturing industry, is that you have companies that start to bundle services into their manufactured products. You have examples like Peloton, you have Runkeeper applications on ASICS running shoes, and most famously, Apple, who has already been doing this for a long time. So in the manufacturing industry today, digital services are becoming a key element of your product. And to deliver that world-class bundle product, you need to really integrate your traditional supply chain and digital supply chain in a very good digital ecosystem. The ecosystem participants may mean something like operational technology service providers. It could mean corporate IT SaaS providers. It could mean a payment ecosystem, or it could mean just simply the computer service providers, cloud service provider, who give you all the capabilities for AI and machine learning. A direct connection to this manufacturing ecosystem allows company to have really real-time visibility into their factory operations, as well as their supply chain status, right? This real-time visibility will allow the company executives to make immediate decisions following a natural disaster or a potential geopolitical event. Can we move to the next slide, please? So eventually, this is the one message I'd like to invite you to think about, right? Digital supply chain requires a digital ecosystem, right? You got to think about what your digital supply chain will look like, and then think about how do you strategize on optimizing it. Can you move to the next slide, please? And we are not the only one that's talking about this, right? According to McKinsey, the digital ecosystem is going to be account for more than $60 trillion of revenue by 2025, right? And the growth of this digital economy is especially obvious in the post-COVID era, particularly in the manufacturing industry, where we traditionally see a lot of focuses on operational resiliency, on how to optimize the factory operations. But now we also see a lot of focuses on how do you actually create flexibility and agility in the supply chain, as well as how do you actually optimize your user experience. Can we move to the next slide, please? And interestingly, that's actually how Equinix has evolved over the years, right? So Equinix started just about 20 years ago, and we were the place where all the networks came together to peer traffic. We were the neutral location to exchange and peer. Can you go to the next slide? And over the years, the network service provider has been deploying their networks on platform Equinix so they can peer traffic. As of today, we have more than 1,800 network service provider on the platform. And basically, this is the foundation of the internet, right? As time passes, financial customers and digital media companies, they realize that since their customers are all connected to the network service providers, and since all the network service providers are all in Equinix, the most efficient way is to get to their customers is by co-locating in Equinix. So you have the financial ecosystem and also the content digital media ecosystem starting to deploy on platform Equinix. Can you move to the next slide, please? And at the same time, the cloud service providers start to realize that as well. That is the turning point, right? As cloud service providers start to realize their customers are also connected to the network service providers in Equinix, having a presence on this digital ecosystem will help them to provide better application performance and actually enable lower cost and yet enable more consumptions with their customers. So the CSPs are starting to deploy inside the Equinix digital ecosystem. We will often say connections enable consumptions. And this is the reason why there are more cloud on-ramps inside Equinix than anywhere else in the world. Can you move to the next slide, please? So this is a kind of a simple demonstration of where all the cloud service providers are in both high performance, low latency locations as well as just the on-ramp locations. Can you move to the next slide, please? And then enterprises start to deploy inside Equinix for a number of reasons, right? The first one is they realize that the cloud services they need, the payment ecosystem they need are already inside Equinix. So they could increase the performance and reduce cost by placing their data closer to their end users. And in the case of manufacturing industry, the factories or the branch offices, right? And the second reason being that now, since all of their lab applications are not running out of their headquarters anymore or their core data center anymore, they really don't need to be in the data center business. Your applications are running across the cloud in different distributed edges. So they start to enjoy that benefit of OpEx versus the CapEx, right? Can you move to the next slide, please? And the same thing is happening with the manufacturers, right? Over the past few years, we start to see organizations connecting to vendors, and some of who are already working with, right? But again, instead of connecting to them outside of wall of Equinix, now they are connecting directly to their partners within Equinix. And those connections takes hours instead of weeks or months, right? So one thing I would invite you to think about, are you working with more or less partners over the past 5 years, over the past 2 years? When you start to think about the different aspect of your supply chain, your traditional supply chain, your digital supply chain, how are you tapping into the digital ecosystem, right? A lot of the clients we talk to indicate that they have found that this digital transformation cannot happen on the legacy architecture. Can you move to the next slide, please? As of today, we have identified key global manufacturing hubs where all these ecosystems are located. And we have the capabilities to recommend to our clients on where they really should be, depending on their existing partners or partners of interest, or just simply on their physical locations, whether it's branch offices or their factories. You would like to find out how we can do that for you, please do reach out afterwards. Not only do they have that capabilities to connect to each other, but they are also able to connect to all the other partners that help to run their core business. Next slide, please. Like for example, these are just a list of the participants in the manufacturing ecosystem. You have the network service providers, you have the unified communication service providers, you have the data analytics service providers, you have the cloud service providers, right? So these are all examples where you can really take advantage of by tapping into that digital ecosystem. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, is basically because the networks are already built inside Equinix and data is going to pass through the Equinix locations, right? So having a presence inside the Equinix ecosystem will really help companies to manage and transport that data securely and efficiently, right, within the overall digital ecosystem. So that's kind of the materials that I wanted to share with the audience, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I think this kind of resonates well with Chad's presentation as well, where he also sees that physical and digital coming together, right? So Annie, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you. That was very interesting. Now, my first question is to Chad. And I believe Dr. McIntyre has also joining me for this session. Hi, John.
Hi.
Okay, so Chad, I am also involved in manufacturing I run a small business. The question is that how do you being your company, gets your clients in the right time frame of going towards digitalization? And because it takes awful amount of patience and resources and dollars.
Yeah, I think as I've watched digital transformation projects unfold, some purely on a factory floor, some reaching all the way up into cloud-based analytics and that sort of thing. It can be one or it can be both. I think first, an organization has to be prepared and they have to have the right people and a budget. I mean, if you remodel your basement, you're going to spend $100,000. Why would you not be prepared to spend at least that to change something to make your company better, right? So it does take resource, but it also takes people. And occasionally I'll see, large matrix organizations just throw one person or a handful of people at solving a digitally transformed factory of the future. And it's just not enough. So I think sometimes you have to have that frank discussion with a chief technology officer or a CEO or a CFO or all three in the same room and say, look, if you truly want to do something differentiated to prevent disruption of whatever you're trying to achieve in your industry, you're going to have the right people and you got to have a reasonable budget. And And a lot of these projects are not a flash in the pan. So you have to take the patience to say, are you willing to do something transformational that's going to be a long-term journey past a 12-month fiscal cycle? And that's a hard conversation, but it's an important conversation to have, so people are prepared for what ends up being a journey versus a flash in the pan or a silver bullet. I also think that to get started, you've got to help people run that racetrack and come up with a handful of use cases so you can build that momentum, so they're willing to maybe risk or maybe willing to be constructive for a longer period of time to do something transformational. The short-term thinking, believe it or not, is more expensive. So if you can get them, meaning organizations that think more long-term, it helps. The other part that I think de-risks making any movements is coming up with a well-thought functional specification. So if you want to make digital decisions based on data coming from your factory or industrial environment, well, you've got to have a plan for those facilities to have plug-and-play machines that you can pull data from. It's just as important to have the physical connected devices at the base layer before you start doing creative algorithms and AI and all these other great things long term. So begin with a functional specification or have a plan, right? And that plan may change. And the other thing that I really try and advise people to do when they get started or convince them to move from zero to something, it's leverage the partners in their ecosystem. I don't think that they're alone. I think manufacturers today have people that they rely on in their supply chain, maybe who they buy equipment from, or who does physical integration of equipment, or they might do software integration or architecture, system architecture. I think bringing those groups together is really important and breaking down the silos, because you might have an engineering department that's coming up with the vision of the product they want to bring to bear or commercialize, and then you've got operations teams that are trying to make it happen, and IT teams that enable all the tool sets. And if they operate in individual segments, I don't think you make the right kind of progress. If you can encourage leaders of organizations to bring those three teams together to think strategically about transformational efforts, and they've got to all contribute some resources and some creativity, those are the ones that have stood the test of time. Whereas if you do a project that's digital in nature, in isolation, in a developmental of a product, or in an IT department, or in an operations, if they're isolated, then they can conflict long term with strategy and resources. So I guess make sure you have the right people, have a plan, and certainly make sure that you're getting collaboration within an organization. And I do think that companies like those participating in this session today, I think they've felt this before, right? Where you're that connective tissue in between different departments of a company that wants to prevent disruption from what they're trying to produce, whether it's a discrete product or it's a process-oriented product. It doesn't matter. You got to bring people together and collaborate, regardless of how great the technology might be.
Sure, great, thank you, Chad. And Kyle, question to you: in terms of how does your company assist your clients when you're starting the engagement in terms of creating digital ecosystem clients?
Sure. So usually the first step that we will recommend our clients do is to take a look at how all the different assets are connected, because usually we found out that the first step of that network optimization is the foundation to really start to take advantage of tapping into that ecosystem. And also some of the cost savings that's come through that stage one project will usually automatically fund your future projects. So that's usually that we have seen across maybe 80% of the cases.
I see. Okay, good. Yeah. Thank you. John?
Yes, hi. I enjoyed both of your presentations, and thank you for being with us. I have a question for Chad. I think he's still with us. Chad Schaefer. Hi.
Yes, sir.
I have a more European type questions in the German context or the European context. Obviously, digitization of operations, engineering, manufacturing implies a reorganization of workflow and an optimization of costs, which means labor costs. How do you deal with highly unionized workforces as you convert one factory from one mode to another? That's question number one. And then question number two, Germany is really well known for its apprenticeship system, in which you really can prepare the workforce of the future really already schooled into artificial intelligence modalities to really work in the factory of the future, which is really not the factory of the future, it's a factory of the present.
Right.
So these are my two questions directed more pointedly at you because you are Siemens, of course.
Yes. We have obviously employees around the world. In the US, gosh, I mean, it varies between 50 and 70,000. In Europe, we have, probably well over 100,000. It tends to ebb and flow. And so we try and make sure we have employment close to where our clients are. And so our manufacturing sites are distributed all over the planet as well. But if you look at maybe a union-based manufacturing environment in Europe, the laws are a certain way. They're not necessarily the same as they are in the United States as to what they might be in APAC countries. And so it is highly unionized. And so what we found, particularly with that Amberg example that I gave you, and if anybody's interested, we do offer a virtual tour of that facility because it was the first one where we really pushed hard to say, let's take our talented people and put them in the best position to contribute. And we really tried to make sure that when we did these projects for digital transformation, it started as a collection of use cases and then it turned into a strategy. And overall, the strategy is whether you're the CEO of that facility running the P&L, or you're a person that's doing maintenance on a machine, or you're involved in quality control, or really even if you're involved in the sanitation of the facility itself, everybody has the same incentive. And I think that's what's really important, whether it's pushing a broom or coming up with a really wonderful way to use AI or an AGV or contribute to a cell of manufacturing that's got a little bit of a gap to it. Everybody has to have a similar incentive. And that really helped a lot. And now granted, I would say in Europe, the laws are such that somebody who has a C-suite role or a leadership role, they're only allowed to make so many multiples than the person on the factory floor. And they view it as equally important, right? Everybody has to contribute their talent. But again, I would come back to answering your first question on the union factor. It all has to do with making sure the incentives are quite similar, regardless of how you're contributing to that factory. The other thing is with a lot of these programs or initiatives, everybody has their hand in it. Again, it started with lean. It's just that now they're leaning in on using digital tools to make better decisions. And it ends up freeing up labor to go do even better projects is what we found. So we were able to stay very much headcount neutral. And that, of course, made the unions very pleased. And in a lot of ways, we improved the work environment for those that are doing the labor-based role. And then when it comes to the apprentice topic, I'm a result of the apprenticeship program at Siemens. We believe heavily in developing young people, whether it's for me as an engineer, I went through a 2-year program before I was ever allowed to truly be involved in running my own project. And that's from an engineering standpoint. And when it comes to a technician or an electrician or somebody who's doing maintenance in one of our facilities, it's the same scenario. Typically, it's a 2-year development program where you're rotating through experiences. So you're very prepared to contribute in a positive way. And I do think that in the US, my hope is that some of the government entities, some of the educational institutions that are fantastic here in the US, if we can foster more of that, I think we'll end up with happier employees that are doing what they were born to do in terms of talent. But yes, apprenticeship does play a role. And we find that in recent years, by having these digital enterprise or digital transformation roles, we attract some young people that do amazing things. And one of the bits of advice I offer to executives when I consult with them on where to get started on a transformational project that involves data is, don't just have a traditional team, have a cross-functional team that's cross-generational, where you get the baton passing of those that have tremendous experience and knowledge with people that are bringing wonderful ideas and talents and tool sets and the ability to adapt and be agile, coming out of, again, a master's, doctorate, or even an engineering program. I think if you have those different generations, it only benefits the project, it benefits the company, and it serves as a pseudo apprenticeship. And I think, again, on the digital transformation effort, those cross-generational teams, those are the ones that have the higher probability of success, regardless of technology implemented. That's just my personal observation being involved in projects. I can't say that's statistically true for the industry at whole, but you've got to include the next generation in these projects. And I think for those that are running companies, boy, invite that next generation to these hard projects. They bring something wonderful to it. So I hope, Dr. McIntyre, that addresses both questions.
Thank you very much. Very thorough answer. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Annie,
John?
It's the end of our timeline, but
yeah, I just have one quick question to our both speakers, Kyle and Chad. In your opinion, what do you think in order to maintain the worldwide competitiveness in manufacturing? What percentage of US manufacturing industry is doing digitalization at this point as we speak?
It's a tough one.
Sorry?
Tough question.
Kyle?
Yeah, I don't have a hard number in terms of what's the percentage of the manufacturing industry is going through digitization, but I can say that's a significantly high amount, and especially that's true post-COVID, right? Before COVID, usually all the manufacturers are relying on their retail partners or distribution partners to go through to increase the sales. But post-COVID, the retail industry is experiencing an extreme hardship. So people are shopping online, and the first thing that they check is the manufacturer's website, right? Whether the manufacturers offer direct shipping or not, and stuff like that, right? So as I mentioned earlier, this is not only limited to supply chain, but also you have to start thinking about how digitization is impacting your end users' experience. So that's digitization is a must for every industry these days.
Right.
And if they don't go through that, you will get reflected in the financial numbers very quickly.
Right, sure. Chad, your answer briefly on this?
So I would put it in context of kind of the steering committee of MAPI, which is the Manufacturing Alliance of Productivity and Innovation. I reach out to them if you get a chance. Great group, but I spoke to their board, and they asked me the question, the exact same question. How many folks are really jumping in on digitalization and investing in the future of their businesses with it? And I actually reflected back to them. I looked at all their websites. Out of the 26 board members, 15 out of the 26 companies either were advertising it on their website, were promoting a white paper of some sort, or were pretty far down the road of doing something, right? So, I mean, I think more than half of industry is trying, and then it becomes different based on which vertical industry you're in. I'd say the automotive industry, they don't have a choice, right? They have to be very competitive. I think the food and beverage industry is coming along, and they have certifications like the FDA they have to please. So doing that in a more digital format becomes very important. I think pharmaceutical is accelerating. If you look at the COVID scenario that Kyle discussed, I think it's forcing them to be more digital in nature with their decisions. So again, I'd say it's about 50-50 based on, again, just from a meeting with MAPI, and they represent a lot of middle America and domestic manufacturing, great group, and a lot of supply chain topics there. But then after that, I think it's really depends on the vertical. And where there's more competition, those companies are going to be forced to digitalize their business or make those digital transformation efforts, or they'll be disrupted, and supply chains will essentially put them out of business. So I think you have to keep changing. And I think those that are smart are making a strong effort and not just giving it, slideware, right? I mean, you got to roll up your sleeves and do the work, and it is work.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. With this, I would like to thank our presenting partners, Georgia Tech Cyber and Equinix. This has been a great event, and I welcome one of our sponsors and partners, Alex Warner. He's a project manager with Forward Foresight, to extend vote of thanks. Alex, please come in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ani. And thank you, everyone, for having us. And I just wanted to give a vote of thanks to all the sponsors for the event. Thank you to the U.S.-India Business Summit and the state of Georgia, Forward Foresight, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, University of South Carolina, Beaufort, Next Gen Manufacturing, Connex, the U.S. Business Research Center, Illard Millennium Technologies, and Marshall Automation America. Thank you to all the supporting partners, and thank you, Ani, for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate our partnership and look forward to continuing it. I would like to inform the audience that we are getting ready for our future events in June, as well as in October, our 12th annual event. We will stay in touch with you. Thank you for joining us. Be safe.
One remark, I've placed my colleague, Professor DeMillo's address, questions for the new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy at Georgia Tech. It's in the chat room if you want to get that address.
Great, wonderful. Brian, do you have anything to say?
I just want to express my thanks for allowing me to participate and be a part of today's event. And thank you for, and thanks to all the attendees, especially my students who showed up.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. With this, I'm signing off, everyone. Have a good evening. Be safe, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.